Allison, whenever you're ready.
All right, I believe our audience has trickled in. We're ready to go.
Okay, with that, let me get started with our regular meeting of the Larkspur City Council on Wednesday, February 3rd, starting at about a couple minutes late, 6:33. Again, this is a regular meeting, but we are doing it by video conference and teleconference only, published online with our on the city's website, our Zoom information for folks to join us if they wish. So why don't we go ahead and get started with a roll call.
Councilmember Kandel.
I'm here.
Councilmember Hilmer.
Here.
Councilmember Paulson.
Here.
Councilmember Way.
Here.
Mayor Hara.
Here. So thank you for joining us. And as we get started, we're going to restart an old tradition with the City of Larkspur, which is to say the Pledge of Allegiance, which we're going to try to do here tonight online. So I think we actually have a flag to show. I'm not quite seeing that. There it is. So for those of you who are able, you don't have to stand up because if you stand up, you get out of your Zoom picture. So, but if you wouldn't mind, if you could join me in the recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the
flag of the United States of America, and to the flag for which it represents, to the republic for which it represents, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, good start.
A little delay, really tough.
There's a little delay in the audio, but that's okay. All right, good enough. Okay, and with that, I think we can move on to public comment. This is only for matters not listed on the agenda, for members of the public to address our city council regarding those matters. Please raise your hand, I guess, state your name and city, and we'll proceed on that basis. So Allison, do we have anyone from the public who wishes to take advantage of this opportunity?
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members or any emailed public comment, and there is no public comment.
Okay, I'm sure we'll get that later. So that's fine. Agenda item number 3, presentations and proclamations. We have none. Approval of the consent calendar. So looking for Allison's comment. We have to take one item off the agenda. Allison, can you remind me of that because I'm not finding the email?
Thank you. Yes, to note for the record, item 4.5 will be removed from the agenda and won't be included in the approval of the consent calendar this evening.
Okay, with that modification, do I have any comments from City Council on the consent calendar? Are there any members of the public that would like to request a removal from an item on the consent calendar?
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members or any emailed comments on the consent calendar, and there's no public comment.
Okay. With that, can I have a vote for approval of the consent calendar from someone on the council?
I'll move the consent calendar.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Scott seconds. I guess, do we need a roll call?
Yes, Councilmember Kandel.
Yes.
Councilmember Paulson.
Looks like he fell off the screen.
Yeah, he dropped off.
I'll circle back to that. Councilmember Way.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hilmer.
Yes.
Mayor Hara.
Yes. So is that sufficient if Councilmember Paulson can't join?
it is. It's still, since we only have a 4-member quorum and it's unanimous, it's sufficient to pass.
Good enough. All right. In that case, the motion is approved. And we'll move on to agenda item number 5, which is the city manager's oral report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. I really wanted to highlight one item this evening. COVID has forced us to change a number of our traditions and practices. And one of the newer traditions in Larkspur for the last several years is a celebration by the Larkspur Community Foundation of our volunteers. And unfortunately, that celebration, which has been a very festive gathering at the American Legion every year and has typically happened around Valentine's Day, won't happen between now and our next council meeting. But I was thrilled that the leadership of the Community Foundation reached out to us for our support, and they are actually doing an outreach to volunteers in the community now. And they've set things up to celebrate and recognize folks and give them a little reward of certificates so they can go to Farmhouse Local, which is the caterer often for the event that they hold. So just wanted to give them some acknowledgement of that they're doing that. And perhaps when the next meeting occurs on the 17th, we'll invite them to come and give some feedback about what's happening. I do see several of them are in the audience though, so I'm sure if you want more details, you could get them from them.
Well, would that be an opportunity for some public comment?
We'll invite them. We'll invite them and we'll do it right as a presentation at the next meeting.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much for that. Any comments on our city manager's report? Okay, anything from the public?
Nothing currently raised from our audience members, and there's no public comment.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we'll move on to council members' oral reports and comments. Do we have any reports from any members of the city council? I see Catherine raising her hand.
I just have two things I'd like to get everybody up to speed on. The first was actually about the Larkspur Community Foundation's event, so I appreciate that you brought that up. The gift card is available, and you just reach out to the Larkspur Community Foundation. I really hope we can continue this tradition because it's 4 years in the making, and every year it gets better and better. So my second thing is I co-chair the PDEP committee, which is the Public Disaster Education Committee, which is part of the county's disaster committee. And we met on Monday for the February month, and Lainey Hendricks, who is the PIO, the Public Information Officer for the county, was invited to speak about preparedness communication. So this committee, which is about 12 or 15 people, are doing a deep dive into preparedness communication strategies to do a report to the DC3 in March. So I'll keep you updated on that. Other than that, there's nothing else going on.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. That's terrific. I see Councilmember Paulson raising his hand.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Two brief reports. One is, even though we're in the middle of in the middle of rainy season, the WPA has been working pretty actively to get us ready for the summer and the fall. And many of you may have seen the article in the IJ on the weekend for the Zone Haven evacuation engagement. So the MWPA is starting to work with a system that's going to allow for first responders and staff and public officials to, work with the routing and evacuation based on real-time data. And I think I see Chief Martin is in the audience, and he was, really prominently featured in that article. So it's just encouraging that the work really goes on, and we have a lot to do, to catch up by the summertime. And I also wanted to do another shout out to the chamber. I was really encouraged to see some of the work they're doing. I think Julie might be in the audience as well, Julie Servetto. And the work with trying to really promote minority businesses and do some work, I believe, with the Comcast Rise program. So she's been really pushing that, and it's just great to see in the context of tonight's conversation as well. So thank you to Julie and to Ruben and to all the staff. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Gabe. And anyone else on the council? Vice Mayor Helmer, do you have anything to add? Okay, I think we're good to go. Well, thanks for all of that, and let me just join as we did the last meeting and really acknowledging Julie and her work with the chamber. She and I went back and forth on a variety of different things this day, and it's really helpful to have her engagement. So with that, we will move on to the main agenda item, our agenda item number 7. So 7.1, consideration of renaming of Sir Francis Drake Boulevard and use of disposition of Sir Francis Drake statue. So before I turn this over to our city manager, I would like to make just a very brief introductory statement. At the outset of this conversation, I would like to address a suggestion that has been made by some that I should recuse myself as mayor from leading this conversation. That suggestion was made in light of statements I've made to the press and elsewhere, and the idea that those statements somehow create an actual or perceived conflict of interest. I do not believe that they do, but I nevertheless have checked with our city manager and city attorney to get their thoughts. I wish to make clear that any views I have expressed on this matter, either publicly or privately, have never been intended to discourage the expression of contrary perspectives by anyone. In fact, quite the opposite. My hope is that our community will have a robust public discussion with respectful consideration of a diverse range of opinions. No outcome for that discussion has been predetermined, at least not by me. I have heard nothing to indicate the existence of a conflict of interest that would require or even recommend my recusal in this matter. As a result, I will not be recusing myself in any way, and I look forward to conducting tonight's public discussion consistent with regular practice. So thank you for your indulgence in letting me make that statement, and I will now turn it over to our city manager for the staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. I'll be very brief as this really is an opportunity for the council to lead a community discussion. As we've outlined in the staff report, following requests that came in during the summer from members of the Marin community, that the Council of Larkspur and subsequently some of the other councils in Marin County take a look at the history of Sir Francis Drake and ask if it was appropriate for him to have recognition in the name that one of the major streets in Marin County bears, as well as a statue at Larkspur Landing. They asked for us to take a look at this in light of some of the background of Sir Francis Drake, which we've discussed in the staff report. The council had been planning to hold some forums to talk about this, and as the council's aware, we became informed by our own police agency as well as some regional police agencies of plans to significantly damage, if not try to remove the statue. So we took that down to protect it. And so as we were doing that, the county offered that they would lead a process to discuss these greater issues of the legacy of Sir Francis Drake and the name of the boulevard that traverses from San Quentin Peninsula out to the coast. And so the county asked each jurisdiction to appoint 2 members to participate in a working group. For Larkspur, that was Mayor Haroff and Councilmember Candell. That working group held 2 countywide sessions to learn more about Sir Francis Drake and to hear from the community. And the working group met several times to discuss what would be an appropriate process to engage each respective community and jurisdiction. It was ultimately decided that it would be appropriate for each council to take up this matter at its own public meetings and to do it in a format and a style that's consistent with their practices. Staff sort of reflected back on how the council has chosen to, in the past, deal with significant community issues. And we also looked at some of the history in California with respect to process around street naming. And although there is no clear path defined for cities in terms of a process for this type of question, there actually is for the county, which is to hold a public hearing pursuant to a state code. A public hearing is a format that Larkspur employs quite often to engage the community and hear from the community. And we felt that this structure would work well for this conversation that starts tonight. And so we've formatted this as a public hearing with 2 discussion items contained within that are related to one another. The first is whether the council wishes to rename Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. And the second question is what we should do with the statue that we have been storing since removing it from its location at Larkspur Landing. There are a couple things that I want to note before turning it back to the council. The first is that there were some requests for us to be more clear with the community about the amount of Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, the length that traverses through Larkspur, and provide a diagram. That's been posted to the website as part of the agenda. Today it was posted. It's roughly 1 mile that's within our jurisdiction. And you'll see it outlined on that diagram. Secondly, want to be clear that the council's not being asked at this time if they support a renaming, what that new name should be. It's proposed by the working group that those jurisdictions that elect to do a rename would take up that question of what the new name should be through a subsequent process. So the question that you're hearing from the community tonight and discussing among yourselves is whether you would like to see the boulevard renamed within the jurisdiction of Larkspur. And then lastly, the Public Works Director noted with respect to the statue, the staff report suggests that it could be relocated somewhere else in Larkspur on public property for roughly the same cost as installing it to its previous location. And the Public Works Director reminded me there's a rather substantial foundation in the earth at its past location. And so the cost to relocate it would probably be higher than the staff report indicates by a magnitude of about $10,000 or more to build the proper foundation if it's to be situated somewhere else in Larkspur. So I wanted to correct that for the record. I turn it back to the mayor and the council members for any questions and discussion. The mayor has asked that we have available some material that the county presented at one of its sessions, and we do have that if it's the mayor's desire to show that to the community. And then at some point, the mayor should open a public hearing and take comment as part of the public hearing format.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Actually, I had requested that we include those materials from the county in tonight's program. And if this is the right time to do that, I think we should go ahead.
I do see Councilmember Candel's raised his hand a few times, and it looks like Councilmember Way has as well.
Yeah, well, that's fine. Let's start in order. Councilmember Candel.
Thank you. City Manager, could you do me a favor just for the benefit of the council as well as the people watching along? Could you remind us the cost in dollars, both of what it would take to put the statue back at its original location, as well as the cost of renaming the road just to the city of Larkspur?
The cost to restore the statue to its previous location, we think, is roughly what it costs to take it down, which is about $20,000. So, you know, the exact number will require the engineers to go out and do some assessment, but it's in that ballpark. The renaming process is across all 5 jurisdictions. We estimate to be, for the public, roughly $150,000. How that will be distributed among the jurisdictions is something that would have to be decided among those jurisdictions that vote to change the name. The most sizable cost is actually working with Caltrans. There's a number of fees and costs to change their signs. We thought that number would be higher. We were surprised. The reason it's not as high as we thought it would be is it turns out for a significant road, Sir Francis Drake Boulevard has very few large signs on it that say Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. Most of the signage on Sir Francis Drake Boulevard is the sort of standard street sign that you see in your neighborhood. Those are relatively inexpensive to replace as compared to the types of signs that hang from traffic signals and the like. So the public cost is like I said, around $150,000 if all the jurisdictions participate, and most notably the freeway costs. You'll note in the staff report, the staff committee that was asked to do some of the research tried to assess what the impact would be to individual property owners. And we came to the conclusion that it's going to vary radically depending on how that property owner, business, resident identifies itself, what types of materials it has to change, what its third private party contracts look like. As you'll note in the report, most government agencies will not require refiling of documents with those public agencies. They'll simply make a note that there's a successor name to the road name. So that isn't a cost, but it's simply beyond the scope of our capability to go business by business, resident by resident, to understand what those individual costs might be.
And Dan, I'm sorry, just a quick follow-up. I know it's a 150 you said for the entire county. I also know that the road goes through certain cities more than others. The big green highway signs, you know, we discussed the most expensive. They happen to be in Larkspur. So could you give us some kind of estimate or, you know, an educated guess if everybody just paid for the signs within their jurisdiction, what Larkspur would be looking at?
So actually in Larkspur, we only found 3 signs that we would actually need to replace, I believe. There's a number in your staff report, and I'll try to call it back up while we're talking. For us, the biggest cost would be if the jurisdictions don't share the cost of the freeway signs, we most likely would bear a more significant portion of dealing with Caltrans, because Caltrans would view Larkspur and the county as primarily responsible for the cost of the exit signs if there's not some agreement among all the jurisdictions. So I would say ballpark with all of that is probably, accounting if we had to bear all the freeway costs, you're talking $30,000 to $50,000, depending on how it plays out with Caltrans. But if you're just talking about the street signs, my recollection talking to the Public Works Director is you're talking about a very modest cost of like $1,000 or less for the signs along Sir Francis Drake Boulevard.
So I'm sorry, and just to make sure I understood, $50,000 if we have to pay for the highway signs, but $1,000 if we don't?
We have about $1,000 or less of costs within the city of Larkspur, and then what's unknown is who will bear all of the costs to change the freeway signs and pay all the fees to Caltrans. And I'm hearing numbers between $30,000 and $50,000 for those costs.
But just to be clear, Dan, that is how that cost would be allocated is not been determined.
That's correct. And one of the questions we don't know is, you know, as the staff report notes, it's been noted publicly, the 5 jurisdictions involved are legally allowed to give the street a different name. It can bear 5 different names. That's lawful. So if that happened, what those street signs look like and who's responsible for them becomes a much more complicated question.
Which would ultimately add to the cost of some of the freeway signs if that happens, I assume. Anyway, Councilmember Way, you had
so I want
hand
to
up?
elaborate. Yeah, I'd like to elaborate on that last question. Being that we're only 1.1 miles of this, to our east is county by Remillard Park, and to our west is county going down Sir Francis Drake and through Kentfield. Ross has already decided not to change the name. So we could be looking at a patchwork of names running down this corridor. Is that been considered by the working group as something that's functional within our main corridor area to have a patchwork possibly of names? Did the working group talk about that?
So Scott, unless you want to jump in, I'd be happy to address that.
No, go ahead.
So yes, the working group has thought about that. And I think the sense in that group is that it would be unfortunate if there was a variety of different names attached to the street along the entire stretch of the boulevard. So the hope has been that there will be a consensus that develops with our community and with the other communities that are affected to proceed in a way that creates consistency in the naming of the roadway. The decision of the Rosstown Council has affected our ability to actually proceed with that view. But you know, I've had conversations with folks there, and I'm actually optimistic that if the rest of our community decides to go in a unified direction, that we'll be able to reach a consensus about a unified naming of the street.
So my second question is just looking at process, and I wasn't part of the working group, was I know we are only a little 1 mile part of it, and the majority is within the county jurisdiction. I looked up the planning division's rules for renaming a street, and number 1 was to submit a petition requesting a street name change signed by all affected parties, owners, and indicating the reason for the change. Was there discussion about having all of the affected property owners sign a petition?
Within the working group, we haven't gotten to that point. I mean, that's actually kind of where we are. I think it's important to clarify that the working group has just been an effort to introduce this issue to our larger community. There has been no attempt by the working group to kind of prejudge any outcomes for this process or to preempt whatever legal processes are required in order to accomplish a name change. This has really at this point been an exploratory process in order to tee up the issue. And that's in fact what we're doing today, is to allow our community to consider whether this is something that we could endorse. So no decisions have been made. No formal process has been initiated at this point. One of the things that we did discuss, and I'll be clear about this, is a recognition that if there is going to be a name change, there's an opportunity with the renovation of Sir Francis Drake Boulevard now to implement that in a thoughtful and timely way. That renovation's not going to be completed until later on this year, like November, something like that. So there is plenty of time to do whatever we need to do to comply with whatever applicable requirements may be relevant in this context. At this point, we're having a conversation. We're looking tonight for input from our community and from City Council to inform that conversation. And we will be making whatever recommendations need to be made to carry out the desires of our community. But that's where we are. No formal process has been initiated.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
If I may, just so there's not confusion among the public, Councilmember Way is referring to a county policy for the initiation by citizens of a change in the name of a road within the unincorporated Marin County. The town of San Anselmo has a similar policy. The other 3 jurisdictions that participate in the working group have no policy about how to initiate a change. So I just want to make sure the public's clear. The Larkspur Council is not, doesn't need to address that policy question from a legal standpoint for the town of for the city of Larkspur.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you for that. I thought I was clear with that, but it's more of a, I'm very interested in the process. So that's part of the process decisions that we're doing.
Absolutely. And we're very mindful in our conversations that have occurred so far that there are process issues that will have to be addressed regardless of the outcome. And nothing that has occurred in the conversations that we've had in the working group or otherwise precludes that in any way.
So if I may, I'm sorry.
Actually, Mayor Haroff, are you intending to take public comment on these as 2 separate issues, starting with the road and then going to the statute so that people know when to jump in and give their comment, or do you want it to be flowed through both issues?
Actually, it'd be my preference to focus on the name issue first, and then we can talk about the statute.
I'd prefer that too. Thank you.
Because I think we have a little bit of a video presentation that I'd like to introduce at this time. Although our city manager, I think you raised your hand to
I did want to note, because I was one of the staff people to the working group, that we were asked the other question that Councilmember Way asked, which was the issue around having the name be different and what the implications of that were. One of the questions staff was asked is if that circumstance already exists anywhere in the county. So I did think it might be relevant to remind Mayor Haroff and Councilmember Kendall, because this was quite a while ago, but that circumstance exists with the city of Larkspur now. Magnolia is one name given to a north-south corridor that's also known as Corte Madera Avenue and Camino Alto. So it does already exist in Marin County, and I think it is relevant to note that point.
And I appreciate that, and that's a fair point, and that is something that we have had a conversation about within the working group, and I think we recognize that, and that may be an outcome of this process. I do think that there has been a sense among some of us who have been participants in that process that having a broken up name would be not the best outcome, but it's a possibility. And if that's what the community wants to have, that is the way it will go. Nothing has been predetermined. So any other comments from council members? So consistent with the conversation we've just had, I think it would be good to continue to focus on the name change issue. And with that, if we can tee it up, it would be nice to have the video presentation. This is something that was put together by the county and was made available to us on the working group and other members of our community in a county presentation that focused on the roadways in unincorporated Marin. But I think it's a very helpful context, provides a very helpful context for our conversation tonight.
Ready for me to hit play, Mr. Mayor?
Yep, hit play.
Okay, I'm gonna hope the sound comes through.
I got it on. I got it on my screen, so I'm hoping it works.
I haven't shared a Zoom, YouTube video before.
Okay, I'm not hearing any sound.
Okay, hang on. Allison, I might need your guidance if you've had any.
Hey, Dan.
Yes.
I actually had this experience recently. You check your share
settings. Sorry, hang on. Share settings. Okay.
You may find that there's a separate share setting for audio.
Ah, I am glad you are here to share sound. Thank you very much. Let's see if that fixes the problem. That improve it?
Nope.
But the question is,
There
how
it
can
is.
there be such different historical views on Sir Francis Drake? Just by my own estimate, there's probably over 1,000 scholarly resources on Drake. And if you look at these different quotes, you get a pretty good idea. All 4 of these scholars are indeed scholars. They're all credible. So how is this possible, right? That's the question, right? How can there be such a distinct difference? See, the word history can often be used with different meanings. But for tonight, I want to talk about history as sort of an academic discipline. Historians are trained to look at the past using a wide range of methodologies. We like to pride ourselves on an effort to remain objective-minded. However, all historians are products of their own time periods and are beholden to the sources available to them at the time. And of course, there's other limitations and biases that can come in there as well. So a critical element of understanding any sort of deep dive into Drake, in my view, is historiography, which tonight means sort of the untangling of the historical record, or the history of the history, if you will, of Sir Francis Drake. And this is the timeline of the historiography, or the history of the history, or perhaps you could call it the different perspectives over time. And it is vast. And I should probably point out that this is really just one small string. Sir Francis Drake is really just a small piece of a much larger history. History is a process, right, where we understand more and more over time. And the widening of the story is important.
A little bit about who the Great Rancheria people are, direct descendants of the Coast Miwok people. We are Coast Miwok of the Marin County, understanding the culture and the history and the importance of place, which is now in our ancestral lands of Marin County. Uniquely with the history that has been impacted from first contact as it's recorded by an outside narrative and perspective would be that of Sir Francis Drake, in which in 1579 began a narrative from a different perspective. I think that there should be an understanding that we're all living through new times. People are looking at the past and where there needs to be a real truth-telling about the history. But there certainly needs to be consideration of the various people that have not been included in the colonized view and how names and places have been shaped. And I think that's the responsibility we all inherit. Our culture is predicated on a deep understanding and a deep discipline of having stayed in our tribal homelands for thousands of years. Our elders say since time immemorial. We have archaeological evidence and other types of science-based evidence that states that our ancestors can trace resources and cultural remains back to over 10,000 plus years. We are a living tribe, and that we have a lot of connection and continue to engage in Marin County as it is part of our ancestral land. Ironically, we talk about a name for a road after someone who spent such little time here, when there is a living tribe of over 1,400 direct descendants who are Coast Miwok and Southern Pomo, directly from Marin and Sonoma County. Many of us have that direct ancestry to the Marin County. We often were facing, oh, we thought you all were dead. And oftentimes hidden right in plain sight is the truth or a history and a people and a culture, and that is rooted to place.
On the subject of Sir Francis Drake, a lot of the information that's out there was written from the European perspectives. We're trying to do our best to represent our thoughts as tribal people on that subject, but you have to kind of keep in mind too that there was definitely a language barrier during those interactions. So it's hard for us to really speak on how that interaction between Sir Francis Drake and the Coast Miwok people in 1579 might have gone down.
Sir Francis Drake Boulevard's been the name of the major east-west corridor in Marin County for the past 91 years. It's the result of at least 7 roads of different names developed in the early days of the county. And in the 1930s, these roads were consolidated as a continuous link from San Francisco Bay to the tip of Point Reyes. And the naming, as you'll see, was largely a decision based on civic boosterism in Marin County, with the Golden Gate Bridge approaching completion and offering an opportunity to build Marin's economy and raise the standard of living during the Great Depression. So the road got its start as a trail. By tradition, one of the many routes used by the Coast Miwok people to travel between San Francisco Bay and Tomales Bay and to Point Reyes proper. And it's likely that these ancient trails were followed by Spanish and Mexican conquerors during the mission period and up into the late 1840s. And it is likely that these new routes taken by the Mexicans and beyond were based on the Coast Miwok routes. And during the 1850s and early 1860s, after the Coast Miwok had been forced off of their traditional land and European settlers made their homes here, horses and wagons followed the Olima Trail, which likely mimicked the Miwok route. So the entirety of today's roadway, called Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, had its origins in at least 7 separately administered segments. And let's look at those briefly, east to west. The 2 segments between Kentfield and San Quentin started as one and was divided by the new Highway 101 in 1930. And this part of the road that we're seeing here was built in the 1860s as a connection between Ross Landing and the ferry at San Quentin. It was further improved in 1930 by convict labor from San Quentin to connect communities to the west, like San Anselmo, and the east and the Richmond Ferry with the new 3-lane State Highway 1. The road was straightened through Greenbrae in the 1950s as that community grew out of the picturesque dairy pastures. And until 1933, this road was usually called the Kentfield Greenbrae Road, or just the Greenbrae Road. Now, the oldest of these 7 segments is probably the one from Kentfield to San Anselmo Junction. As part of the county road between Sausalito and San Rafael that was developed in the 1850s, this segment was usually called the Red Hill Ross Landing Road. It remained with the name Ross Landing Road well into the 20th century and was a section of Highway 101 for a few years before the opening of the more direct and modern Eastern Highway in 1930. So the San Anselmo to Fairfax section was part of the developed county road between San Rafael and Olima that was laid out in the 1860s, with Lagunitas, San Geronimo, and Nicasio growing in countywide importance. A good road was needed to San Rafael. In 1865, the county constructed a new road from what would become Fairfax over White's Hill and through the San Geronimo Valley. And they replaced a steep trail up White's Hill at the time. In 1867, Austin continued the survey of this road between Lagunitas and Olima. So here Austin laid out a road hugging Lagunitas Creek. This was named the San Rafael Olima Road and usually just called the Olima Road. When Point Reyes Station was founded by the North Pacific Coast Railroad in 1875, a good road from Olima to Point Reyes Station was built, and this is today Highway 1. So in 1873, Austin designed a new road to Point Reyes that followed the west shore of Tomales Bay, past the future site of Inverness, to the Point Reyes Lighthouse. A cutoff to this road across the marshes near Point Reyes Station was completed 3 years later. So by the mid-1870s, all the section of the road, now called Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, were in place, although in primitive state by today's standards. So by the teens, most of the roads in town were paved, but the rural routes to Point Reyes, Bolinas, and Tomales continued to serve as bone-jarring relics of the past. In 1925, Marin voters passed a $2.5 million road bond that promised wide, paved, modern roads to connect to the coast. These improvements focused on moving the agricultural products of Western Marin to market, offering a more efficient mode of travel by truck than the fading old 50-year-old railroad line. So most of the bond money went to what was called the Manor to Point Reyes Road. And this new road followed the old county road between Western Fairfax and Point Reyes Station, but wider with curves smoothed and grades eased, and it was to be paved with concrete. Now, Manor was a train stop on the western side of Fairfax. This is what it looked like in the 1920s. And Point Reyes Station was a commercial and agricultural center serving the area around Tomales Bay and Point Reyes. So hence the Manor to Point Reyes Road was the official name of it. So the new highway to the coast was a big deal for the farmers and the merchants in Olima and Point Reyes Station. and the name so far given, Manor to Point Reyes Road, left much to be desired. A prominent storekeeper in Point Reyes Station offered his idea to the public. Wilfred J. Salachi owned the Point Reyes Emporium, one of the major stores in Point Reyes Station. In July of 1929, as the new highway was being paved, Salachi wrote a letter to the San Rafael Independent offering an idea that he felt would enhance commerce in West Marin as well as the county as a whole. Bill was an active member of the booster organization called Marvelous Marin, and he suggested a famous name for the future road. And he wrote, "This highway is the most important in the county as it is the main artery through the county, and a name that will tie in with some event or part of our own history would do much to secure some of the advertising that Marin County is desirous of getting today. For instance, with the completion of the Golden Gate Bridge, it will be the desire and ambition of every tourist visiting California to cross this gigantic structure. Crossing this bridge into marvelous Marin, where our natural beauties must appeal to travelers from all over the country." Now, if such a name as the Sir Francis Drake Highway would be acceptable to the county at large, try to visualize for a moment the publicity that would be obtained therefrom. The discovery of California by Sir Francis Drake as a part of the history in every state of the Union. So therefore, the adoption of this name would make the publicity as complete or more so than any name that could be approved of. And he closed his letter stating his belief that the name would be one, quote, "the county will be proud of hundreds of years hence." As he noted with the coming Golden Gate Bridge, Salachi's suggestion was based entirely on bringing business from tourists and new residents to Marin and its coast. So Marvelous Marin ran with Salachi's idea, and the new highway from Fairfax to Point Reyes Station was dedicated by that organization as Sir Francis Drake Highway on November 16, 1929 in Olema. It was high school student Mary Menzies who announced to the crowd, "In memory of those brave men who landed on the shores of marvelous Marin in 1579, I christen this highway Sir Francis Drake." That day, the Marin Journal editorialized, and I quote, "The completion of Sir Francis Drake Highway means millions of dollars of increased value to property owners," unquote. Let's change course just a little here and talk about why the suggestion to name the highway after Drake came to be. It's no doubt that because of the name applied to Drake's Bay, which was the eventual destination of the road. So a new publication by anthropologist Zelia Nuttall called A New Light on Drake appeared in 1914, arousing new interest in Drake's history and landing site. So the naming of the bay and the establishment of early commemorative sites at Drake's Bay no doubt led to much of the reasoning to name the new highway after Sir Francis Drake. And I think it's unlikely that these local merchants, residents, and religious figures had any detailed information about Drake's full history. In California at the time, his was a heroic story of a sea captain who circumnavigated the world and claimed the California shore for the Queen of England. Marvelous Marin and the newly formed Sir Francis Drake Highway Association publicized the new road around the country. In 1931, a portion of the eastern segment of the route, composed of the two roadways from Ross through Fairfax, was named Sir Francis Drake Boulevard at the request of civic leaders in San Anselmo and Fairfax. The boulevard would connect with the already established Drake Highway and eliminate older street names through those communities. So these actions took place in the halls of town government, but the Marin County Board of Supervisors were a little slow to adopt the name Sir Francis Drake Highway, and the name only appeared about a year after the dedication in the minutes. And not until 1933 did the board officially adopt Sir Francis Drake Boulevard for the collected roadways from Greenbrae to Point Reyes Station and beyond.
Okay, is that the end of the video?
Yes, that was the end of the video.
I think. Okay, all right.
The longer version is available to the public. We provided the link in the staff report.
Okay, just kind of working through things here. So, I thought that was extremely informative and helpful to inform the conversation that we are going to have as a community. without any, again, predisposition about what the outcome of our decision might be. So let me first bring it back to the council. I think, I don't think we're ready to go into the discussion about the statute at this point. Is that my shared understanding with folks? Okay, in that case, let's bring it back to the council for any comments on that, and then we'll open it up to the public.
So Kevin, I watched that the original presentation, which was last Monday, I believe, that was held at 6 o'clock by Supervisor Rice and Supervisor Rodoni. I thought it was Dewey Livingston's presentation as a historian of the name history of the road, I thought provided some context. But what I came away with from that presentation of Dewey's was how very, very, very few people, businesses, residences, et cetera, were on that stretch of road during that time of the renaming. There were a lot of ranches. There were some small clusters of downtown corridor areas, for instance, through San Anselmo. But other than that, there were, I don't know how many residences and business, but it's sure like a very few. So just want to put that out there because we're in a very different context now where there are thousands of residents and businesses along that corridor.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Any other comments from members of the council? Seeing none, I think we want to open it up to the public. Is this a time to say that we're going to have a public hearing on this, or we're just going to open it up for comment?
No, Mr. Mayor, I think the way we've structured this format, we're doing a notice public hearing. So you should open the public hearing. And then would you like a timer for this public hearing?
I would like a timer because I see we have a lot of people, and I want to try to keep this according to our general practice to allow members of the public to individually make their comments, but try to please keep it within 3 minutes. And if it looks like we're going to be going over time, well, we may reduce that later, but let's start in that way. So with that, I'd like to open the public comment process for public hearing.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, while I call up the timer, perhaps Allison can remind folks how they can raise their hand if they would like to speak.
Please do.
Yes, our audience members joining us by Zoom can press the raise hand button located typically at the bottom of your screen, but depending on your device, it could be elsewhere. If you're calling in by phone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand for public comment. And you also have the option to comment via email to comment@cityoflarkspur.org or using the e-comment form, which is linked on the online agenda packet.
Okay, and just for clarity, Allison, since we do have the timer on, you're going to start it off at the beginning of every individual comment, and I will watch that. And as members of the public approach the end of their allocated 3 minutes, I will just remind them that that's it.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else from the council before we get started? If not, we'll go ahead and start public comment.
Our first public comment will come from Andrea Davies.
Hold on, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah, just before we get started, Allison, I'm seeing the screen. It's kind of stuck on the 3 minute. Is it going to run?
Yes, I believe the timer will.
Yeah, you're asking Allison, but I've been, she's delegated upward. I'll be running the timer for you tonight, Mr. Mayor. So
okay, all right.
I will hit play. I was waiting for the speaker to unmute.
Okay, that's fine. Please go ahead. We're all getting used to this format.
Hi, my name's Andrea Davies, and I first want to thank you for the opportunity to speak and be part of this discussion. I've been a Marin County resident since the year 2000, and I used to be a Larkspur resident. I was up on Elm Avenue for a few years. So I'm speaking now as a member of Marin County and member of this community, but also I'm another one of those academic historians that was mentioned in the video. My PhD is from Stanford, and I've taught California history as well as US history here in Marin at Dominican University. I've taught at USF in the city. I was an assistant professor at the Cal State Northridge for a few years, and now I currently teach a course in US history at Stanford University, where I'm employed, working with some of the best minds that we have around the world who are working in history and other disciplines of the humanities. So with that in mind, I would like to strongly encourage Larkspur to be on the right side of history, and I don't say that lightly, and vote for changing the name. And I say that as an academic historian for a few reasons that were pointed out, I think fairly clearly in the video, is that a historical moment is one thing. It's what we're creating right now. But to have a historical view, that is, how do we take our moment in the present and look at the past and understand the past and how it makes the community that we have today in Marin County and how it makes us as individuals who reside in Marin County today. And when we take that view, that means history is active. And as an academic historian, the leading minds that I work with in US history, it's one that continually re-examines the past to understand who we are in the present. It is not static. Just as if we were to tell the stories of Marin County or the city of Larkspur, the story of the last 24 hours of everyone who lives in Larkspur County, that is the kind of experience that's often escapes the historical record. And it's up to us to decide who we are in the present. And part of that is by understanding the past. I think it's quite illustrative when you look at the history of the naming of this, that it didn't occur until the Great Depression, and community interests were in mind. And it meant just as much to the businesses here in 1930 as it does now. I think it's now when we look back at this hundreds of years from now, as the gentleman who suggested the name change in 1929 said, we want a name that we'll be proud of. I think Larkspur should look back 100 years from now and not be embarrassed by not making this change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You are right on time, and I encourage everyone who follows you to pay attention to that screen as well. So, and again, for those making public comments, please, as our previous speaker just did, announce yourself by identifying your name and where you live. That'd be great. Let's go to the next public comment.
Our next public comment will come from Joan Lundstrom. And Joan, you may unmute yourself.
There, okay, thank you. Joan Lundstrom, longtime resident of Larkspur, like over 50 years, and former mayor. This is the time for the Larkspur community. I'm going to just address the statue, just that part. What to do with the 30-foot statue that had to be come down because of vandalism and potential personal injury. I'd like to remind everybody, again, since we're talking about history, the history of this was a gift for private donors, not commissioned by this city, nor formally dedicated by the city council either. It's really a one-of-a-kind public art piece by a local sculptor who did things out of driftwood along the creek when Janis Joplin and the Dead lived in Madrone Canyon. That's the context of the statue. It looks surprisingly like his previous wooden Don Quixote statue. I compared the picture, and the only difference is Sir Francis Drake carries a flag. They both have swords. And he doesn't even look like, as the artist said, a short, dumpy Englishman. So many of us fondly remember the statue as a mythical knight, just interested in tilting at windmills. So I am personally saddened that this unique sculpture is caught up in the present day controversy, which is in numbers of communities, over the symbolism of public monuments. I feel this is a different category. It's not a monument. And where else in the Bay is a similar sculpture like this? I think we should try as a city to keep the sculpture, but change the name to Don Quixote. Why not? He's conqueror of anything. He's a fictional character, not even try to name it about any person. We should then turn this into a teaching moment to recognize the original inhabitants here before colonialism. The Coast Miwok had a rancheria nearby where San Quentin is. The site is on the creek, is a perfect location for installing a plaque to the native history and perhaps adding creative sculptures to include native peoples. Think of the site. We can also start including in our own city's history details of where Miwok Indian sites were and shell founds were, now all gone. Our own history includes only the newbies, the rest of us, and not the Indians. Thanks.
Great. Thanks for that. And I just want to remind folks that at this part of the conversation, we really want to focus on the name change issue. I think we're going to be coming back to the disposition of the statute, but those comments certainly inform that conversation as well. So if we could move on to the next public commenter.
Our next public comment will come from Tamara Alliston.
Hi,
Dan, you need to reset the
Great.
timer here, please.
Hi, you can hear me, right?
Yeah, just a moment. We're having a little technical.
Sure.
There we go. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, great, thanks. I live on Alicio in Greenbrae, and I first want to start off by saying thank you to the mayor and the council members for your hard work. I especially appreciate the disaster preparedness that you're doing, and that's so important for all of us. And I'm grateful for the chance to offer my input tonight. I wanted to share that I strongly support the change in the name of the road Sir Francis Drake to something else. And I wanted to do so by sharing just briefly a 3-generation story of why this matters to me. So the first is that while I myself am not a person of color, the other members of my family are. And soon after moving to Marin in 2011, my husband was repeatedly pulled over by police as a person of color. That's the first of my 3 stories. The second is that I learned from a 4-generation Marin family who gave me a copy of the Articles of Incorporation for Greenbrae soon after we moved here. And those had explicit references to the racist exclusion of people of color from this community explicitly in the founding documents of the community of Greenbrae, which shocked me greatly since I live here anyway. And the third is the much less severe, but nonetheless real experiences of unintentional bias that my children, also people of color, have encountered in this community. So when I think about that versus the impact of changing 3 signs so that our town can be entered through a street that better recognizes the incredible contributions of the Indigenous people of this community, it seems like a very easy question. And I strongly encourage a decision to change the name of Sir Francis Drake. Thank you.
Thank you. You were at 2 minutes, so you're doing better than everyone. Okay, thank you for that. What's the who do we have next on the queue?
Our next public comment will come from Ari Bloom.
Ari, are you there?
And it appears they may have lowered their hand again and don't wish to speak. So I'll move on to our next public comment from caller ending in 1402.
James Holmes, Larkspur. To acknowledge that the Boulevard was once a Miwok trail, as San Anselmo's mayor and IJ columnist Spotswood propose, would be fine, but for 4 reasons Drake's name should also be retained. First, while we might hesitate to let 1 or 2 cities control the result, having different names in different jurisdictions would be the worst alternative. The effect would be disjointed, confusing, and odd, if not outright silly. Second, a name change would inflict needless hardship on many residents and businesses forced to change many records at a difficult time. Cindy Winters, before she was stricken, sent me a list of over 31 items that might need to be changed. Not everybody would need to change every item, but most people would need to change many. Telling people just go and deal with a multitude of bureaucracies and companies, etc., seems only a little less callous than saying let them eat cake. Third, the current name is itself the product of an amazing episode in Marin history that's been dismissed cavalierly as mere marketing hype. Actually, the name is an example of how one citizen's letter to the newspaper can launch a movement bringing together many people in multiple jurisdictions over several years to elevate the profile of a then depression-battered, obscure cow county and commuter suburb by highlighting its connection to a world historical celebrity. And incidentally, well before the renaming, none other than Winston Churchill wrote a letter to a Larkspur resident commending the recollection of Drake's memory, where one of his great exploits were performed, as Churchill put it. Finally, despite the small but vocal group that disdains our European heritage, and even though Miwoks once lived here, the fact remains that Drake's heritage is more relevant to most Marinites linguistically, culturally, and religiously than is the Miwok heritage. For these reasons, add, if you wish, a Miwok reference, but keep Drake as well. Thank you.
Thank you, James, for that. Let's go on to the next public comment.
Our next public comment will come from Steve Dodge.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
So my name is Steve Dodge, and I live in Canada, but I vote in Larkspur because that's how it works for US citizens living abroad. I left the Larkspur area around the same time that Andrea, the first speaker, arrived. And since I've been here, we've undergone a process of truth and reconciliation with the whole country's Indigenous population. And it's led to a number of recommendations, which include several that relate to commemoration. And since 2015, when they made these recommendations, there have been a number of changes in Canada and I live in Vancouver, British Columbia, that have changed the landscape and changed the culture of the area in very positive ways. And I think that this is something that is being lost in the discussion around Drake. I should also say I'm an alumnus of Sir Francis Drake High School. I grew up in San Anselmo, lived in Sleepy Hollow, and know Sir Francis Drake Boulevard like the back of my hand because I was a cyclist. And basically, the school has gone through this process of rejecting the name ultimately, but now they're in the process of choosing a new name. And although the process of rejecting the name was very sort of tumultuous, now that they're entering this process of choosing a new name, I think people are beginning to see that there's an opportunity to select something that we can all get behind and that we all can have more connection to than most of us had to Francis Drake, who frankly, when I was growing up, no one cared who Sir Francis Drake was in our high school. I'm surprised at the number of people who are really animated about this issue, because if you had asked anybody in my high school when I was a student there who Sir Francis Drake was, the vast majority of people wouldn't have been able to tell you. and now everybody's an expert. and I must say that I think that's something that if we were to combine these two ideas, the idea that we're in a process in California that's beginning now of reconciliation for the genocide that occurred in California. If we can use the space that Sir Francis Drake is now taking up and use it as a gesture of reconciliation to the indigenous people, I think that would be a wonderful thing that the community could all get behind. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for keeping to your time limit. Appreciate that. So Allison, who's next up?
We received an e-comment form that I'll read aloud to the council now. This comes from Jesuina Perez Turan. The public comment reads, "Good evening. It is time to rename Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. One of the main arguments people are making against the name change is the fiscal impact. I'd like to encourage to look at this issue through an equity lens. Sir Francis Drake had a grip on slavery, and that should be enough to rename the boulevard. The rippling effect that the slavery has had on the African American community is felt to this day. Change the name. Many thanks. Jesuina Perez Turan, PhD." And that is the end of that e-comment. I'm looking for any further raised hands from our audience members or any further emailed public comment.
Okay, we had a long list, and apparently not everyone's wanting to do it. So, anyone else?
We do have one raised hand coming in from Danette City. Danette, you may unmute yourself for public comment.
Hi, thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you folks. I too don't live in Marin any longer, but I am a second generation born and raised in Marin County. And I also attended Sir Francis Drake High School, graduate of theirs. I actually think a combination of names, Sir Francis Drake Boulevard and Miwok Trail, would be wonderful to do. Changing the name entirely, I agree with the notion that it puts quite a bit of burden on residents and businesses along there at a time when people are struggling financially. Even though Marin County is quite affluent, there are still people there that are struggling financially. I would love for Marin to do more to honor the Miwok tribe in some other bigger way, much the way, say, Wichita did for the Plains Indians, which was extraordinary. What they did was put together an incredible museum space. The other thing I wanted to mention is that there are still many folks who are quite distressed, quite upset over the name change at Sir Francis Drake High School, and they number in the hundreds. So Mr. Dodge's assertion, which I respect him, but he's incorrect. People are still very upset about that process, the way it played out, and the fact that they voted to go ahead and change the name despite surveys of 3 different constituencies, 2 of which opposed it. So there's still some upset in Marin and among 70 years of alumni over that issue. So I would encourage you to consider a dual name for Sir Francis Drake Boulevard and Miwok Trail. I think that would be lovely. And I think the county should look at what they can do to create a space. Oh, and I wanted to mention, I always knew who Sir Francis Drake was. I knew he was an explorer and that he had circumnavigated the globe. I don't know why people didn't know that, but I sure did as a kid growing up. I was also aware of the Miwok because my mom was very much about learning things outside of education. But I think Marin can do much more to honor that tribe. And I encourage you to take a look at what the city of Wichita did. Anyway, thank you for the time and for letting me, even though I'm no longer living down there, I love Marin, I miss Marin, and I wish you all the very best. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those comments. Very much appreciated. So Allison, anybody else with raised hands or wanting to speak at this time?
I'm looking for any further public comment, and there is no further public comment.
Okay, so I think with that, we'll close the the public hearing and bring it back to the council for further discussion. And again, that this is just the first half of this conversation on the overall topic, focusing on the name change, not on the disposition of the statute. We'll get to that in a moment. But I would appreciate hearing from members of the City Council in their reactions and have a discussion about where we may go with next steps. Councilmember Paulson.
Great, thank you, Mayor. So I wanted to keep, my comments brief so that, we can hear more from the public. And I just wrote some, my thoughts down and tried to limit it to 3 minutes. So for me, the process started when we had our workshops back in the summer of 2020, and I wanted to, revisit some of that and really take the long view. So, as we're considering renaming Sir Francis Drake, I'd like to step back for a moment and ask, what are Larkspur's community values? What is our commitment to equity? Last year, after the murder of George Floyd, Mayor Way articulated the City of Larkspur's position. We commit to become an ally to the cause of breaking down social inequity. In that commitment, 2 core values, fairness and inclusivity. I joined the City Council subscribing to those commitments. The current agenda item of renaming Sir Francis Drake Boulevard is one possible means to uphold that commitment. The renaming is not an end, it's a means to that end. Like all council members, I'm doing my best to listen. I've read and reread all public comments. I've reached out to numerous community members, and I really wanted to hear both sides. What I'm hearing is division. I hear honest differences. At our workshop on June 29th, 2020, one African-American woman urged us to focus on substance and not on symbols. Another gentleman, African-American, said that the thoughts of the Sir Francis Drake statue or boulevard left him crying and trembling. These differences seem reflected in the Drake High School debate. Apparently, a majority of students of color, I think 64%, and parents, 54%, oppose the name change to Sir Francis Drake. After listening, I just want to respond with 2 questions. To those who oppose renaming the Drake Boulevard, could diversity and inclusion benefit us all? Are the petitioners really asking for their rightful place in the American story? To those who are asking to rename the boulevard, I'm asking you, are there other ways the Larkspur community can promote fairness and inclusion that are more material and will build consensus? I believe we can address both racism and bring our community together. Regarding the renaming, to any motion to rename, I want to propose a friendly amendment that Larkspur co-name the boulevard. Many of you are aware of this option. I've researched the New York City's implementation of this and have begun discussions with our city manager about the feasibility. Currently, we lack standardization of a publicly approved process, so dual naming is a placeholder for a more thoughtful resolution if that needs to happen. Regarding policy, I just want to identify 4 other ways that the goal to equity can be reached by other means. The first is policing. So I really would like us to continue to work with the Central Marin Police Review Board and look at possible metrics for fair policing. With businesses, we're working with the Larkspur Chamber of Commerce and currently are working with Comcast to support minorities and businesses of color. With housing, we have a lot coming up on the agenda, and we could explore affordability and public-private partnerships for better socioeconomic representation. In education, this is outside our jurisdiction, but we can work with our partners to advocate and expand inclusivity. So I will intend to raise these issues at future council meetings and committee meetings. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Paulson. And again, with encouragement to keep focused on the issue at hand, which is the possibility of a name change for the boulevard, particularly within our jurisdiction, because that's what we need to focus on. Any other council members? I see Councilmember Way raising her hand.
Hi, yes. I think I just need to do a point of clarification that a lot of the comments have been an assumption that if there is a name change, that it will be an indigenously related name change. And I don't think that that's been set. There hasn't even really been a process decided as to what the framework is of a new name change. So I just want to put that out there, that people are making an assumption it'll be related to the indigenous community that lived here, but that's not necessarily the pattern. I really liked your comments, Gabe. I think I've really been struggling with this issue myself. I've spent a lot of time looking back on some of our decisions that came about and were brought forward to us last June when we started this conversation when I was mayor, in regards to really looking at equity and social justice issues that were brought forward nationally and brought forward to us. So this is when this first comment rose to the attention of the community. I'd like to refer to our public comment section that we've had over 25 letters also and emails submitted from our community, not just the speakers who came, and thank you for speaking. But the majority of the opinion of those speakers, of those writers, who many of them are direct Larkspur residents and our constituents, is that it's not the time now to expend the resources for a name change. But I want to step back and sort of try to reach in to think about what we mean by equity. And I think that this is a very important conversation that this community is finally starting to grapple with. But I think it's a very broad topic that is bigger than race. It's a socioeconomic discussion. And whether our time and energy spent on renaming a street brings us the equity outcome that we would like to see, I am skeptical of that. And I'll point to a couple of things. The first was that article in today's Marin IJ, where they were discussing what the county is doing as far as looking at equity and looking at all of the ways in which the county is engaging in their work relationships within equity. And they gave an example of one of the partners of the team, one of the teams is partnering with Marin Promise to promote kindergarten readiness and healthy child development through home visits. Marin Promise is a network of 100 school districts, community members, and nonprofit organizations committed to strengthening Marin schools and educational support for children. That's a real, tangible way to look at how we can put our resources towards affecting equity for the children who exist here now. I looked at what the Marin Community Foundation has put forward as their 3 levels, lenses of equity. The first being education, where student achievement for low-income students and students of color in Marin falls far below the achievement of more advantaged children in the county. The gap is 1 in 5. That's something that we could focus on. The second is health. Because of social and economic inequity that exists in Marin, low-income residents and people of color are more likely to struggle with poor health than their higher income counterparts. We're seeing that in our response to COVID-19 within this county alone. Within Larkspur, we have a Marin Community Clinic office located on Bon Air Road, and the Marin Community Clinics serve over 35,000 low-income residents within Marin County, or for no cost or low cost care. We have one of those clinics right within our own jurisdiction, and that clinic serves low income seniors within our community. So the last part the Marin Community Clinic, the Marin Community Foundation talks about is economic opportunity for many families in Marin who do not have enough money and an income to meet their basic needs, such as housing, food, and healthcare. Those are the 3 platforms sort of the Marin Community Foundation is looking at. And I take that lens and put it to where we are within our community. We've spent 18 months dealing with our low income, trying to help our low income residents in the mobile home park. And we have real equity challenges that require our thought and our policy changes and our funding here and now. So if we're looking at this from an equity lens, I want us to realize that we also have those challenges within our own jurisdiction and within our own community as a whole. And then my second thought on this is that a name change during the second year of a pandemic for our businesses that are suffering, for many of our businesses within Larkspur are closing, or they're losing business, they're losing income dramatically. It to me could be a substantial burden to many of our businesses, especially as we're entering the second year of the global pandemic with a recession that's going to follow. I know it looks like we only have 17 parcels within our jurisdiction, but I walked those 17 parcels and they're all commercial parcels, which means at the time that these small businesses are struggling during the pandemic because of lost business, we're going to place an additional burden on them. When you look at some of our parcels, Oak Island has about an 83,000 square foot building, commercial building with 46 different businesses in there. My little walk around, which is an unscientific survey, showed over 90 businesses that we would affect just within our 1.1 mile. That's not residences because we don't have the residences in our section, but stretch that out to the 43 miles of Sir Francis Drake and the thousands and thousands of businesses, it would be a substantial piece. So lastly, to close, I think Councilmember Paulson's comments about having a co-naming might be the best strategy for us moving forward. That will allow us to honor and think about a memorial and expand the conversation about the place and people that have lived here with us now and lived here in the past. But I'm not in agreement of a completely erasing the Sir Francis Drake name because of the impact it's going to have on the people that are living here now. And I'm willing to debate that.
Okay, thank you very much, Councilmember Way. Again, I don't think tonight we're here to make any decision, but I appreciate all those comments, and I hope everyone will continue to focus on the name change. I know there's a tendency to want to address a lot of different issues in this context. I don't want to discourage folks from talking about different things, but I think we need to continue to focus on the issue at hand. So any other comments from council members?
Can I just ask a point of clarification is when do we plan to make a decision on that?
So I think we'll have a conversation after we hear comments from council members about what our next steps will be, but tonight is not a night, I don't believe, for making a decision about how to move forward. I think we do need to continue to be informed by comments from the public, as well as understanding how other jurisdictions are addressing this issue so that we can make decisions that are reasonable and responsible and coordinated with other folks in the Ross Valley. So with that, I think I saw Council Member Candell.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, let me just say, I'm really happy we're having this discussion with the council, with the public. This is why I joined the city council, is to tackle decisions that are not easy. And this is one of those decisions. I agree with everything that's been said so far. I'm looking at it a little differently, though. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is the finance, where we say, okay, and if we are going to consider renaming this boulevard, we need to accept the highest figure, because we're not going to agree to rename it and then change our mind if the number doesn't come out right. So we have to be willing to say, we are willing to spend $50,000 to do this project. That's the first bridge we have to cross, with everything going on with COVID and our budgets. And I would say at this point, again, I'm open to this discussion, I'm willing to say that social equity is a cause worthy of spending $50,000. Okay, we are all agreeing that we are going to take $50,000 and put it in a social equity bucket. And then the next question is, what is the best thing to do with that $50,000? Okay, is it to rename Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, or is it to do something else that would have a greater impact on achieving the goals we're trying to achieve, which is everything Gabe stated, and everything that I think we all believe in, in trying to rectify past wrongs in order to, achieve greater social equity in our community. And I'm a little torn on that, and I'm glad we're having this debate. I mean, I look at, and I'm dating myself, but I remember Army Street in San Francisco when that was renamed to Cesar Chavez. And, you know, what impact does it have changing the name? Well, I think, you know, if you're going to ask me what impact does it have, is it going to feed anybody? No. Is it going to get anybody medicine? No. But if you are in San Francisco, it's now 30 years later, you know, it has an impact. You're driving down Cesar Chavez. Everybody is mentioning that name when they're in that area. And it's something that's become part of the community. And it was a permanent, you know, it's a real change that's lasted. It's 30 years and it will probably last, you know, I would imagine exponentially longer. So the question is, I guess, do we want to take that, you know, and obviously we have a limited amount of resources. We can't just say, oh, let's throw, you know, $4 billion at it and fix the problem. We have a limited number of resources. Do we want to put those resources towards something like a name change that will have a long-term effect, but a smaller immediate impact on the problems that our community is facing? Or do we want to address more immediate issues and take that money and help, you know, with healthcare issues or, you know, food issues, other things like that, that maybe that money could be put towards more immediate benefits, but wouldn't have that long-term effect that a name change would have. So that's where I am and where I'm kind of debating in my head which of those two is kind of is worthy. I know all of us are saying, well, this is just the first step and we're going to do more and stuff like that. But, you know, it's right now, it feels like that's the decision that we're making. You know, that's my thoughts anyway. So, Mayor, thank you for the time. I appreciate that.
No, and I appreciate your comments very much. Councilmember Helmer, do you want to make a contribution tonight?
Only to say it doesn't sound like we're ready to do anything.
In terms of a decision, I think that's correct. And I don't think that was the intent, quite honestly. I think the intent tonight was to have a full-throated discussion of the issues with a focus on whether there might be support for some name change without prejudging what that change may be. Again, I think there's a lot of conversations going on throughout the county in different jurisdictions about this issue. I'm actually quite proud that here in the city of Larkspur, we are among the first cities and towns to actually have this kind of a conversation without making a decision. So I agree with you. We're not ready to make a decision at this point.
Through the mayor, I want to clarify. I made my comment with respect to the name change. I think the equity discussion should continue.
Absolutely. Okay, Councilmember Candell, something further?
Yeah, just a question, really. The first is, I would imagine this may be one of those issues that we do not end up having a full consensus on the council, and we're going to have to make a decision anyway. So I was wondering your thoughts on, you know, the plan forward. And I guess the other question I had was to potentially consider bifurcating this almost to see if there's a consensus that, you know, we are willing to put the money aside that it would take to change the name and then decide if we do want to use that money to change the name or if there's a better purpose for it.
Okay, I'm not sure if that was a question for me or not. It's not my intent, certainly, in running this meeting to make any decisions about any of those issues tonight. I do think we will want to have this agendized for a further meeting. And I want to make clear a little bit in this context about what the working group that has been, that Scott, you have been involved in and I've been working on as well. has been envisioning. The purpose of tonight's meeting, and hopefully other meetings at other city councils, I hope this month, is to have an open discussion with our community about the different issues that are relevant to our consideration of this issue. And I think we've done a good job tonight in having that conversation. I think it will be appropriate for us to, I mean, my own thought is that it would be appropriate for us to agendize this for an upcoming city council meeting, not to select a name, but to decide whether we want to coordinate with other jurisdictions that include Sir Francis Drake Boulevard within their sphere of influence, about whether a coordinated name changing strategy should be adopted. And then after that, we can start looking at what possible names might be. We might not get to that second stage if there is not consensus to further consider a name change. But I don't think we're there yet in terms of our discussion this evening. This is really an opportunity to invite the public to share their views, to invite council members to share their views, and set the stage for the next step. So what I would suggest that we do is have some further discussion among ourselves at the staff level and with representatives of other affected jurisdictions, and tee ourselves up for a decision about whether or not we're prepared to have any kind of a name change at maybe the next or an upcoming city council meeting. It would be my hope that we could at least get to that point, if not by the end of this month, certainly in early March, because I think that's the time frame that other jurisdictions are contemplating. And I think we have an opportunity to continue to hear feedback from the public about what the outcome of that process might be. But at some point, we're going to have to, fish or cut bait on whether we're going to move forward. And I think it's important for us, if not tonight, at an upcoming city council meeting, to make a statement about whether we're willing to consider whether we're willing to entertain a possible name change. If we're not, then I think it's important for the city council to express themselves on that point. It doesn't have to happen tonight, but it needs to happen sooner rather than later, because we can't drag this out. Councilmember Paulson.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just a few clarifications. So with regard to Councilmember Candel's point, I thought it was a really excellent analogy, the Army Street going to Cesar Chavez. But I'd like to reiterate what Councilmember Way said, that there's no guarantee that the name will be Miwok Highway or anything that's more for social equity, something that would redress history or change the narrative. So it could become Olima Highway. So that's one thing, to remember, that if we were to set aside 50,000, we're not, quite doing that investment, calculation, knowing the name change. And then I just wanted to go back to what I had read earlier. In my mind tonight, if I were to move that we vote on this issue, I would also like to make a friendly amendment. If the motion is for the Larkspur City Council to rename Sir Francis Drake, or to allow for a rename, I wanted to make a friendly amendment that we accept the possibility of co-naming. So could maybe we discuss just what the mechanics of that look like? And then my third point is just if you can explain a little better why you think we need more time, because I understand coordinating with other cities is an issue, but maybe you can respond internally. I think we've gotten quite a lot of public comment, and it stretches back to June of last year. And I'm wondering, in your mind, what other clarifications may be on the horizon?
If that's a question to me.
The last one was a question to me.
The issue of co-naming is certainly, you know, a live one. I don't think that anybody has recommended any specific outcome of this process. So I think the idea that it could be a range of different outcomes is still live and is something that will probably require conversations that will continue now for a bit. The issue is really whether this council is willing to continue to pursue the strategy that it adopted in previous city council meetings, which is to keep this a live issue without prejudging what the outcome might be. Going back to some of the conversations that we've had in the working group, there again has been no preconception about what that naming would ultimately end up being. In fact, I think, you know, there's a sensibility that you know, the original, some of the place names that were used for the road, the Alima Road or the Alima Highway or something like that, might be a good idea. But again, no preconceptions. The idea here tonight is to make sure that we have a shared understanding that this is either a live issue or a dead issue. And if there is going to be a motion tonight, I think the motion should be along those lines. I'm not sure I covered everything you were asking, though.
Sorry, if I can just repeat the question, because I said too many things at once. So right now, if Vice Mayor Hilmer moves to vote on a rename, I could then propose a friendly amendment that we co-name, and then we would vote on the friendly amendment. I'm just trying to get the mechanics down.
Yeah, no. So just to respond to that, I don't think on the table today is a name. On the table is whether we continue to consider a rename of whatever that might be. So there's going to be a conversation about what the name will be. And I think that's a conversation that we need to have, not just among ourselves, but with other jurisdictions that are going through the same process. Because, you know, we don't want to name, you know, our section of the road the Alima Highway and then have somebody name it something else and then have like lots of different things. That'll just be confusing.
Through the mayor, Gabe, the answer to your question is you may do that at any point in the process as a mechanical tactic.
So, Mayor.
So wait, let's kind of, you know, calm down here a little bit. So, Councilmember Himmel, was that your comment there?
Well, I just wanted to tell him he could do that at any time he wanted to, or not.
Yeah, I agree with that. Councilmember Way.
Could you elaborate on what you mean by cooperative with other jurisdictions? Is this an in process that you want us to engage with talking with other councils members from other jurisdictions? We already know Ross's decision, so we already are going to have a bifurcated decision one way or the other.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
So how do you perceive we go with that?
And again, that's a question to me.
Yes, because.
So I think we ought to share our thoughts together and with the public about the direction that we think things should go. I understand that Ross has taken a certain action. You know, decisions can always be revisited given different circumstances. So that might be a possibility with that community as well. It would be my hope that ultimately that in working with the county, which actually has the longest stretch of the road that will be renamed, that what we do is consistent with what other jurisdictions, including but not limited to the county, will also do. It certainly, I think, was a sense within the working group, and Scott, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that it would be helpful if we had a single name that the single name would be probably a place name that is relatively neutral in terms of its implications in terms of people's beliefs and that sort of thing. But that conversation still needs to occur, and I don't think we're trying to resolve that tonight. Councilmember Candel.
Thanks. I just have two, I don't know, questions / comments. One is for City Manager Dan. I remember when Army Street was changed to Cesar Chavez, the road sign said Cesar Chavez, and then in parentheses under which it said Army Street. So that, and I believe it was so that the businesses didn't have to change their name, that mail would still go to people, for Army Street, so that it would be an easier transition. I didn't know if you knew anything about that and how that would work.
We tried to actually use Army Street as an example when we were doing research for the working group, because we thought maybe that was a requirement. I think it was, the way you're characterizing it, though, it was more of a effort to relieve or lower confusion. In fact, the name Army Street still appears on some of the freeway signs, which anecdotally we think may have occurred because nobody wanted to pay the fees to remove the name Army Street from the signs after the time had passed. The post office has essentially said, you file with us what the street name is, whatever it is, and for 18 months, we will honor both names. And then after 18, and during those 18 months, we essentially process it the same way we process forwarded mail. So people actually get notices that that their mail has been forwarded on. If you co-name or you put two names or you put something in parentheses, I think those are all options on the table. So you can explore all of them. I think perhaps procedurally, if I could interject with respect to Councilmember Paulson's questions. So this was scheduled as a public hearing, and if the council's not prepared to do anything tonight, continuing the public hearing is an option. This isn't structured, and there's no legal requirement that any motion you make from this public hearing say anything in particular other than what you as a council agree that motion should say. So I think one way to consider what Councilmember Paulson is asking is, if the motion on the table is we conditionally support a name change, but our condition is that it be co-named, I think that is actually a viable motion that you could make and might advance your conversation if you reach that point.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Councilmember Candel?
I just had a second question, which is really, I guess, posed towards you or anyone on the council who has an opinion about it, is that is the name that we're going to choose relevant to people as far as whether we want to change the name? So, for example, I'm not overexcited to drop 50 grand to change it from Sir Francis Drake to Route 21, or something like that. But I might be more excited to change it to something that I felt did promote social equity or justice or whatever it happens to be. If we are committing to a name change before knowing what that name is everybody comfortable with that? And I just wanted to throw that out there.
Councilmember Paulson.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So I think, Scott, that is the dilemma. I think that my sense is, we have 30 people who are listening in right now, and they're being very patient. And I'd like to give us some direction, because I think that this process has been going on since June. But I do appreciate Mayor Haroff's a desire to really let this play out, and that there's coordination with other counties. I really want to respect Vice Mayor Hilmer, who also said he doesn't feel we're ready. My real position is that we reach a consensus as a council. But with that being said, I'd like to ask the city manager to, perhaps, have a little more of a staff report on what the option of co-naming is, so that becomes a viable option here. And to your point, Mayor Harif, I understand that co-naming has nothing to do with knowing what that next name will be. What it says is that respecting the people in the community who feel it should stay the same, respecting those who want to change it, we're reaching a compromise, and whatever that future name is, it'll be co-named, and we unburden the businesses that Councilmember Way said along the corridor that would have to go through this during COVID, so that we achieve, some branding and recognition for whoever gets the second name, and we can move on, to other business. So
and that's fair enough. And just for clarity, in the working group, there has been a recognition that if there is a transition to a new name, and no commitment has been made to do that, but if there is a transition to a new name, that a transitional period would be appropriate. And if co-naming is a way to facilitate that transition, then I think that is certainly an option.
I agree with that, Gabe. I think that that's a compromise alternative we should examine, because it allows a recognition of existing formats in which people and businesses are inhabiting, but also allows us to elevate so names or identities that have not been elevated before.
Agreed. I don't think there's really any controversy on the council on that, but the real issue I think for tonight is whether we even want to have this process go forward, whether it involves a total name change, whether it involves co-naming, or if the council wants to take the position like the Ross Town Council took, which is no change at all and we're done. That I think is something that it would be helpful to have some clarity on tonight. So if there is a motion to allow us to consider different options, including transitional co-naming to a new name, and support by the City Council for that, I would be happy to hear a motion to that effect.
I have a question, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Is the public hearing that's currently open devoted solely to the conversation about the road name change, and not including the
statue?
Right.
No, I think that both issues have been teed up, but I think we've kind of bifurcated the discussion.
You're going to have both of them as part of the same public hearing, or do you want to have two?
If that's a question, I'd prefer to have a hearing on the name change for the road and conclude that with the outcome that we've discussed, and then let's move on to the statute, because we haven't even talked about the statute yet.
I'm going to move that we continue the public hearing on the road change and just leave it open, because what we do on the other thing or not may affect it, and just move that we continue it to a date uncertain. Keep the conversations going, gather information as you described earlier. I don't see any reason to say it's over. But we're certainly not ready to do anything this evening.
Okay.
For example, what we do with the artwork and the area where the artwork was previously located may trigger additional conversation about how we move through the issues we're discussing tonight.
And that's perfectly fine. And I think we probably want to move on to that conversation here shortly. If it's the sense of the council that we just put the issue of our engagement on the name change off to another council meeting, that's fine with me. That's kind of what I anticipated we would do in any event, because I didn't think we'd reach a resolution of that issue tonight. But I would like to encourage the council not to just put it off to an indefinite point, because as I said before, other jurisdictions are considering this issue as we are. And I think it's important for us to have some resolution within our council about how to move forward. And I saw Councilmember Candell raise his hand.
Just procedurally, if I wanted to make a motion, I believe Councilmember Hilmer's motion is on the floor. Do we need to vote on that first?
I don't think that's.
I don't know that that's really necessarily a motion.
I'll say it's not on the floor yet. So go ahead.
All right. I'd like to make a motion, and I don't know if this is even procedurally proper, or if anyone is on board, but I would make a motion that we as the city council commit to spending $50,000 towards social equity, and that could go towards the name change or towards something else if we so choose. Anybody want to second that?
No, I want to comment on that. I think Sky wants to comment on that first, because that's a legal perspective, right?
Yeah, I was just going to note that that the scope of the item that was agendized under the Brown Act really just covered the road and the statue, and a motion to appropriate $50,000 for social equity purposes beyond that scope might be viewed as beyond the topic that was agendized for the public. And if there's a desire to talk about that approach, we might want to put it onto a future agenda so that members of the public who might be interested in the idea of that funding going to something other than the road or the statue would have an opportunity to comment on that.
Okay. Based on that, I'm assuming you're recommending I withdraw that motion?
Or did the motion be to put it onto a future council agenda for discussion?
Okay, so I guess I would recommend, I'm not going to make the official motion, but whoever makes the motion, that be part of the motion to continue this and to encapsulate that in the conversation that we're having about the name change, is what I would request.
So we're getting a little muddled here, and I think it's time that we probably ought to move on to the statute issue. But I think we have a constructive suggestion from Vice Mayor Dan Hilmer to continue this discussion to a further meeting.
Mr. Mayor, I think Councilmember Way wanted to say something.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's right. So I'd like to propose that we decide this matter at our next council meeting with the caveat that we have had hundreds of emails and comments now since June of last year when this first came up. But I'm curious and would like to have more elaboration on Gabe Paulson's comment about the process of co-naming before I make a final decision on that. But I would really like us to move forward with making a decision and not letting this go on for several more months. We have a lot of things on our plate as COVID is going to continue to ravage this community for the next probably 9 months to a year. So I would really encourage us to be thoughtful about it as we have been, but to put a date certain when we're going to make a decision. That's my opinion. I'd like to make sure that we, as you said earlier on, Mayor, fish or cut bait, and I think we're going to have to reach that point soon.
And I appreciate that perspective, and that was actually my what I anticipated would be the outcome of tonight's discussion. But I do really strongly encourage the council to support bringing this back to the to ourselves at the next meeting, and at that time act on a motion to either commit to a process that will allow us to support a renaming, whether it's a co-naming or a single naming or something, or not. And that will be the motion that I would anticipate making at the next city council meeting.
And I'm sorry, if I could ask.
Yes, Councilmember Candell, go ahead.
Can we ask our, I guess, city manager, if there could just be some information provided to us about co-naming? Because I'm still a little foggy about what that looks like. I'm not familiar with very many roads that are co-named and what those street signs look like. So if we can get a little bit more information about how that would play out, that would help us in making our decision.
Just use the
we can certainly come back. Generally, we were aware this conversation might come up, and co-naming typically is a general term. It's not a legally defined term. Some communities actually give a street two names with a dash or a slash or a hyphen or something to include both names. In many parts of the country, co-naming, the original street name remains the legal street name, and a second name is assigned to segments or an entirety of a road, and that honorary second name is also placed on the street sign in a design manner that highlights it while still signaling that the legal street name is the same name it was before. So we could certainly bring you something back that provides additional detail on those options.
And I'm sorry, just so I understand, what you're saying is that it would still be officially Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, but there may be a big wooden sign on the side of the road saying, "Welcome to Miwok Way," or something like that.
Well, in many parts of the country, the street signs are changed, and they are color coded or somehow done in a style that signifies what the legal street name is and then what the honorary street name is. That's a common co-naming practice. And then another co-naming practice that's a little less common is to do the two names with a hyphen or a slash or something between them. I could probably call up some different examples. A lot of them are going to be in other parts of the country where co-naming is very popular. It's not, I haven't seen it as much in California, but I think if we do a little search, we might find some examples in some of our bigger cities.
I think that would be helpful if that were possible.
Okay, anything else from the council?
Only to cite another example, Dan, scenic roads designations, for example. Also El Camino Real, that sort of designation where there's a trail along an important route that's tied to the history. I like that. Actually, whether we're going to have a solution or not, but I thought some of the comments made earlier in the evening regarding the Coast Miwok and a trail identification overlaid on Sir Francis Drake was an interesting approach. But whether or not we want to do that, we're yet to decide. I'd be willing to follow the mayor's lead and make that motion about making a decision at the next meeting, if that's appropriate.
That sounds good to me. Unless if that's a formal motion, then we can ask for. And I don't know that we really need a motion. It's a continuation of the current.
I think, Mr. Mayor, you should entertain a motion to continue the hearing to the next regular council meeting on February 17th, at least as it pertains to the issue of the name Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. And then you should continue the public hearing to this evening to take up the second question that was encompassed in the agendized report, which is the disposition of the statute.
Okay, so that suggestion is that we not address the disposition of the statute tonight?
No, Mr. Mayor, I'm suggesting you entertain a motion now that's specifically to continue the hearing as it relates to the name Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. And then you continue now the conversation in this
I'm sorry.
hearing.
I'm sorry. I was confused by your wording there. Okay, so I would entertain that motion. Do I and in fact, do I have that motion from Vice Mayor Helmer already? Second?
I'll second that. I mean, I really think we need to resolve this, but 2 more weeks is fine. So I second the motion.
Okay.
And we'll note for the record, Mr. Mayor, that we have direction to bring you a report about co-naming options.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So we have a motion and a second and direction to staff. Do we need a roll call?
I think that would be appropriate.
Councilmember Kandel?
Yes.
Councilmember Paulson?
Yes.
Councilmember Way?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Helmer?
Yes.
Mayor Hara?
Yes. So moved. So I think we can now move on to the second part of this this item, which is the disposition of the statute. And I don't think we really have had a staff report focused on that specific issue. So maybe if we could have the city manager provide that at this time.
Just a reminder to the council that for many years, a statue was on display in Larkspur Landing. The statue was the subject of what we felt were credible threats that it would be vandalized, if not damaged beyond repair. We made the decision to remove the statue and store it for safekeeping. The council had directed us that when the questions around the Sir Francis Drake Boulevard renaming came up and were brought to the council, we should bring back the question of what to do with the statue. We've outlined in the staff report that we see 3 general options. One would be to restore it to its current location, or the location it was displayed for many years. The other would be to identify some other public property owned by the city and install the art there. And then the third option would be to inform the artist that the city doesn't intend to display the statue on public property anymore and seek his consultation per our agreement with him as to what to do with the statue, which would likely be to pursue either its display in another public location by another agency or potentially to sell the statue so it could be displayed privately or on private property. Those are all options for the council to discuss and give us some direction regarding.
Okay, so I think this is, I guess this is, we should treat this as a separate public hearing for discussion.
It's still the same public hearing. You haven't actually closed that public hearing. You just continued to the first question.
Okay, all right, that's fine. So let me open it up for discussion by the council.
Through the mayor, just to
go ahead.
Create a segue to the conversation we were having. Councilmember Kandel, a question to you. Would this, there's a location there where there used to be artwork where there were strong feelings about it, but there's a location nonetheless available for an public expression of something. Would this be one possible
Oop, I think he froze up there.
opportunity to use some Scott?
I'm sorry if that was a question to me. I just wasn't able to hear it.
Yeah, I think Dan, you're having some internet issues.
He's still bad.
Yeah. I think the question was whether depending on what we discuss in terms of the disposition of the statue, if the statue is to be relocated or otherwise disposed, whether there are opportunities to still use the existing infrastructure or the concrete foundation for some alternative piece of public art. And I think the answer to that is yes. Councilmember Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just two questions, maybe for the city manager. One is, so the three options on the table are to dispose of the statue, perhaps to the arcs, put it in an alternative location, or put it back to where it was. So to pursue those, is there any, has there any reporting or analysis been done on where the statue could be put, what the alternative location would be? Because I think that would be material to public comment. And then secondly, we took the statue down largely, and I really applaud what you did, Dan, and just want to repeat it, that we were trying to protect lives and we were really trying to prevent confrontation. And this was based on police reports from the county and from our own Central Marin. Is there any assessment moving forward if the statue were put up? Has there been any analysis done on whether that threat would return, or what the status of those conditions are?
We haven't done a threat assessment, but I think we can state for the record that we don't have the resources or manpower to protect the statue if folks want to vandalize it. So one of my concerns is if this particular piece of art remains polarizing for certain segments of our population, the chance of vandalizing or damaging the statue beyond repair, I think, remain real and high. And then I think your other question was where to relocate it. I think the only places the city owns would be one of the public parks or the community facility parcel. I think anywhere else, we don't really have any other property where we could even contemplate putting something this large.
So if I may follow up, we have 11 parks and probably only 2 or 3 of them are suitable, right? So we're really talking about Piper or one of the others. I mean, you couldn't put it in Heatherwood Park or in Centennial Park or any other place.
Well, we definitely couldn't put in Centennial Park because we don't own Centennial Park. We're tenants there. But I would leave the question of whether it could be in a park like Heatherwood Park to yourself and Mr. Hilmer as residents if you would want a 30-foot statue in your neighborhood.
I love the idea of a literary artwork of Don Quixote at the new community facility parcel and library.
Mayor Hoff.
Councilmember White.
I think Councilmember Paulson brought up some really important things that I think we need to make sure we keep in mind, because this came up on my watch last year and it became a very significant potential public safety, could be a disaster. That was vandalized twice that we knew of. Once was someone trying to cut the support limb off the bottom. The second was red paint splashed from foot to waistband, which is a pretty big splash to get there. And the third was the online chatter that said, bring ropes and we're going to pull it down. And that's why we had to respond last year. And I just want us to be mindful that our charge is the safety of the public. And I think as a polarizing, potentially polarizing statue, that may still exist out there. So before we hear, I just want to put that in the light when we hear public comment, that public safety is a paramount thing that I look at.
Very much appreciate that comment, and that would be an issue no matter where the statue, if it would to be relocated on city property, would still exist. So I think I saw Councilmember Candell. Did you raise your hand?
No,
oh, okay.
I'll wait until after that, assuming we're going to reopen public comments because people were told not to comment on it. So I'll wait until after public comment.
That's fine. So anything else from the council on questions for our city manager on this item? If not, I guess we'll reopen the public hearing to invite the public to provide their comments. Is that correct procedurally? So we have this kind of joint motion here. I'm a little confused about how we're doing it, but I think that's as good as anything.
You've never actually closed the public hearing, and you can certainly invite the public to comment again, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, good. That's what I will do right now, is invite the public. So Allison, do we have any members of the public who have raised their hand?
First public comment will come from caller ending in 1402.
James Holmes, Larkspur. I have a question, and that is, are we incurring any storage costs while it's in storage? So that, I don't remember hearing that. I think that may be material. Assuming that we are not incurring storage costs or that the costs are not significant, then I would strongly urge the council to do nothing hasty or irreversible. This present controversy too will pass, so I would urge the council to keep the artwork for the day when it can be reinstalled and rechristened as Quixote, and art can prevail over fanaticism. I think that an avenue toward that result has been pointed out by Councilmember Hilmer, because if a new library is ever erected on the community parcel, having the statue directly adjacent to the library would provide important context and would also provide a more secure location. So if we can keep our options open for a result like that, it would be very desirable. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, James. And again, if our city manager can, not that we had a problem with that, but if we can have the timer running just in case there are others who may want to be more loquacious in their comments. But do we even have anybody else in the public who wishes to comment on this specific matter?
Our next public comment will come from Steve Dodge.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
Hi, it's me again, and I just want to, again, since I live in Canada and since I see, I have maybe more exposure to Indigenous perspectives than many people in Marin, I must tell you that the idea of putting a colonial figure as a statue in a place near Larkspur Landing where, Indigenous people would, at least in the Pacific Northwest, maybe not in Marin, but in the Pacific Northwest, that would be the place where you would put a totem pole to welcome people. And this is a very inappropriate signal that you're sending to anyone of Indigenous heritage who would be arriving from San Francisco on the ferry, and they'd recognize it immediately if they have any sensitivity to the symbolism. And I think that's something that's really important, not just with the statue, but also with the road name. That there's a small, but growing number of people that are becoming aware of what the name and what the symbolism means. And of course, it's not as you're discussing, there are ways of getting, working through it. I accept, but it really is, when it comes to the statue, I really don't think that this is just going to go away with time. I think if anything, as people become more aware of what these things mean, it'll become more of a problem. And if I may, I just want to make a clarification about something that Councilmember Paulson said about the survey from the high school, because I followed that fairly closely. And there's a narrative that's developing around that that's incorrect. The the survey response data was there were three surveys, teachers, parents, and students. And the teachers were generally in favor, overwhelmingly in favor. And the response rate of the parent survey was only 20%. So it was very polarized. And there were about 5% who were strongly against and about 5% who were strongly in favor. And really most people didn't answer. And so since it's a non-random sample, the most accurate thing that you can say about the survey is that you don't know what most people actually feel about the subject. And when it comes to the student survey, they selected it's true that something like 64% of the BIPOC students answered were against the name change, but there were only 17 of them. And so, that actually leads to a great uncertainty about what that number means. So it actually is consistent with the idea that if you did this over years, that more people would be in favor of changing than not. So you got to be careful with the survey data. I don't think it's as representative as people are making it out to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. You're right on time. Appreciate it. Anyone else from the public?
Looking for any further raised hands or emailed public comment, and there is no further public comment.
Okay, good. Well, then I guess we'll close this part of the public hearing and bring it back to the council for your views. And I see Councilmember Way raising her hand.
I'd like and see if we have a potential answer for Mr. Holmes' question about whether we are incurring storage costs.
Would you like me to answer that, Mr. Mayor?
Sorry?
Would you like me to respond?
Yes, I would, please. Yeah.
So we're very fortunate to have a host for the statue at the moment who has not been charging us, but our host has informed us that their need for the space is imminent. And so they've asked that we set a timetable for putting the statue somewhere else. So the only cost we incurred was the removal of the statue to date. That's what we've incurred. I don't know if we could find a place that we could store it locally. There might be a few options in terms of our own resources that, perhaps enough times past, we could put it in a relatively secure storage location now. I think at the time we wanted to find a place that we felt comfortable the statue could stay while we sorted things out.
Okay, and just a follow-up question on that, Dan, in terms of a third party taking custody of the statute, have we had any indication of whether there are possibilities for that?
I have received a few, early on, I received a few inquiries about whether we would auction the statue or just put it up for sale or something like that. And at least one of the callers suggested that he would be someone who wanted to purchase it. I didn't ask him what his intentions were should he purchase the statue. So, I would say we haven't substantively explored it, but I suspect there's some market out there. But again, our agreement does require us to consult with the artist before we do anything.
Right. And have we heard from the artist? I think we've had some interaction with the artist about the disposition. My sense is that he's kind of ambivalent, but maybe I'm wrong about that.
I think that it wouldn't be fair to go on statements the artist made to us at the time. It was a little more emotionally charged for everybody. I think it'd be appropriate to circle back and have a discussion with him now that some time has passed.
Okay, fair enough. Councilmember Paulson, I think you raised your hand.
Yeah, thank you. You asked the question, communications with the artist. So I just wanted to clarify that, from all the public comment in our discussion, again, we faced three choices, putting it back at the landing, putting it in some other place, or disposing of it. And my sense is that, to respect the art and, possibly the sensibilities of other people, putting it back at the landing is not really an option at the table. And I'm wondering if we should entertain that as a motion, or if we should really just continue discussion at another public hearing.
Fair enough. My own sense is that we ought to, this is an issue that we ought to resolve tonight and not put it off. Just because the current location of where it is, the owners there would like us to act. And I think it's fair of them to ask us to do that. So I saw some other hands raised. Councilmember Way.
So it looks like we are down to 3 options. The first is to restore, the second is to identify another public place, and the third is to find a non-city area and dispose properly of this piece of art, which I've always sort of considered it a piece of art. I don't think we have the ability to restore it to its location because of its public safety implications. I don't think we can identify another place within our public land to put it at this time. And that still does not ignore that restoring it would still create public safety hazards. I would like to put forward that we inform the artist and see if there is a ability for us to auction it or sell it to an art collector or someone who could appreciate and restore the piece. It has been vandalized. It has red paint on it, and it has some areas of it that have been damaged. So I think we need to, I would propose that we find a patron who would be interested in the restoration of that piece, and that proceeds then come to the city.
So just to clarify, Councilmember Way, I think what you're suggesting comes within the scope of option number 3 in the staff report, which is to authorize staff to initiate the disposition of the statute without necessarily prejudging what that disposition may be, and to do that in accordance with our obligations to the artist to consult about that.
Agreed.
So if there are other comments from council, Councilmember Paulson.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate all of what Councilmember Way was saying. I'm just thinking that, there are 2 unknowns that make me hesitant about, voting on that motion. One is the city manager just informed us that we may have to move it. There might be another benefactor, another storage location. And if it doesn't cost anything, I don't think there's any burden to us to continue to hold a piece of art, if it's cost free or low cost. And the other is I really did like Vice Mayor Dan Hilmer's suggestion that, it may eventually be part of the library or something. I mean, it is a part of our community. I think we have to reconcile with its symbolism, and that's, for public comment and input and discussion. But I don't think the fact that option 3 is not on the table obviates the choice between 1 and 2. So I would urge to hold off on that vote.
So just to clarify, there was about a $20,000 cost to remove it and to put it on a flatbed truck and take it to storage, right? So we would incur costs to move it from its secure location now to a different location and secure it there. Am I correct with that, Dan?
You are. I suspect the cost to relocate it would be less. Some of the costs we incurred was separating the art from the foundation.
But there still would be a considerable cost associated with that.
We don't know.
Sorry, I muted again.
Yeah, it's okay.
We would almost certainly need to have a crane put it on a flatbed truck again to move it.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions from the council on this? Councilmember Candell.
Yeah, I have a comment, and I'm not sure how this affects the decision being made, but I am cautious that, and I want to phrase this the right way, that I'm cautious to give into mob mentality, that if we do something because you have a handful of hoodlums, that are threatening to do something illegal, I think that sets a dangerous precedent for future times when a group of people are protesting some other piece of art or some other thing that they disagree with within our city, that all they have to do is jump up and down and threaten to do damage to it, and all of a sudden, they win in a sense, and we remove it. So while I agree that public safety is a concern, And that's my hesitation to jump on that bandwagon.
Anything else from the council?
Well, Scott, I think that's understandable. And
sorry, Councilmember Way, you raised your hand again.
Yeah, I hear you with what you're saying, Scott. With that, I was it was such a decision back in June when this was all happening last June, because of the real tremendous energy that was focused on this statue. I think that may have calmed slightly, but I think the sentiment is still there. I think we have to be mindful that it could rise. People's concerns could rise again at any time, and we need to protect the community too. So it's not easy.
Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. No, that's okay. Councilmember Paulson, one more, and then Mr. Helmer, and I will. Oh no, he's waving me away, and then I'd like to finish the conversation.
Thank you. Just a question to the city manager. What's the deadline on, or was there any deadline or maybe a time estimate on when we have to, move it from storage, from the current storage location?
I think that all I heard was as soon as possible, please. So I don't have a firm date. And frankly, I don't know, I don't know what would happen if we hit a deadline. So, can the council wait a little longer? I think so. Can you wait months? I think that would be trying patience.
Right. So as a follow-up comment, I really do appreciate Councilmember Way's comment. And my only request is that as we move the street rename for the next meeting, we move this vote to the next meeting, just, as a kind of cooling down, because it's actually making more sense to me as I think of it. But I would appreciate just, the 2-week cycle to think it over and get some community input.
Councilmember Way, and then let's try to wrap this up.
Yeah, I would be fine with that too. But with the caveat that I think it would be helpful to see what the process would be for auctioning, or once the discussion with the artist patent, is there a market for auctioning or for selling a piece of art like this, and what that process would be for a city, so that we have all the fully fleshed out our 3 choices.
Okay. Anything else from the council? Well, that's fine. I think Councilmember Paulson has made a motion, but before we act on that motion, I would like to express my own view, which is very strongly to authorize option number 3, staff to initiate the disposition of the statue. This has been something that we've had lingering for a long time, and I think it's time for us to act. If it's the sense of the council that we defer for another 2 weeks, but no more, I guess I can live with that. But this seems like something that would benefit from action tonight. So, I'm sorry, Dan, you're raising your hand.
If I could make a suggestion, I think staff and sort of observing the way this item's gone in general, the direction might be tweaked to suggest we agendize this as a separate public hearing. So there's a little more structure to the conversation. So I think if the motion could be to continue this question to its own, or move this question to its own public hearing at the next meeting, if the council's comfortable with that, I think it'll just be a little cleaner.
Yeah, I agree with that.
In hindsight.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, so with that, I guess if we can have a motion along those lines. Councilmember Paulson, I think you made a motion. If you could have your motion reflect the suggestions of our city manager, that would be fine.
Yeah, so I move that we, close this public hearing for the fate of the statue, and have a public hearing at our February 17th meeting, and plan to vote on one of the 3 options laid out, and also to direct the city Adjourn staff to give us a little more information about what might be entailed with disposition or with relocation.
Okay.
I'll second that.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. I guess we need a roll call.
Councilmember Candell?
Yes.
Councilmember Paulson?
Yes.
Councilmember Way?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hilmer?
Yes.
Mayor Haroff?
Yes. So the motion is passed, and I think we are now finished with this overall item, at least for tonight. So I think that was all agenda item 7.1, and we can now move on to agenda item 8, unless I'm mistaken, which are business items 8.1 and 8.2. And the first of those items is fiscal year 2019-20 audit of the city's basic financial statements. And if we could have a staff report on that item.
Allison, is Kathy with us?
She was.
Yes,
oh, she's there. I see her name there. So Kathy, I'm going to introduce you, Kathy Orm, our Administrative Services Director, to lay the foundation for the audit and introduce your auditors.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. We have finished the fiscal year 1920 audit and have our final financial statements. Our primary principal auditor, Ahmed Bedwadi, is here to give us a presentation. I believe he has a presentation for us tonight to go over an overview of the financials of last year. Here he is.
All right, good evening. Thank you, Kathy, for the introduction.
Sure.
I'm Ahmed Badawi. I am the partner on the audit of the city of Larkspur, and I will present to you the result of the fiscal year 2020 audit today. If you allow me to share my screen, I will have my presentation on the screen. And I'm also gonna just go into the slideshow mode. All right. So I'm assuming you can see my screen. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And please interrupt me at any time if you have any questions. I'm going to do my best to see if there are any hands risen or anything like that. But again, thank you again for having me. So I think I have a little bit of delay on my side. So hopefully it's not going to be too much of a problem.
No, you're fine. Good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. So the agenda for what I'm going to cover today, I'll let you know who the engagement team was, what were our deliverables and the scope of our audit, areas we emphasized on during our audit process, provide you the type of audit opinion that we issued and summary of the numbers in the financial statements, some of the required communication as your independent audit firm, brief overview of the new accounting standards, and then see if you have any questions for me. In terms of the engagement team, this was the composition of our engagement team. I was the engagement partner. I had 4 individuals working with me on that engagement. We had a senior and we had 3 professional staff. Also not listed here is an independent reviewer that is always in the background, and the role is to review my work, review the financial statements, and make sure that we adhere to professional standards. So that is just part of the firm quality control system. So it is not something that the city deal with directly. In terms of our deliverables and the scope of our audit, so we were mainly engaged to provide an opinion on the city's basic financial statements. That is the report that includes all city funds and assets and liabilities, including pension and OPEB liabilities. Also, the city is subject to government auditing standards, which require us to issue an opinion on internal control over financial reporting and on compliance. In addition to that, we perform a variety of other audits for the city. So, for example, we have done a compliance audit on the Transportation Development Act funds. We have done a compliance audit on all federal grants, what we refer to as a single audit. And also we performed and agreed upon procedures on the appropriation limit, the GAN limit. Finally, we are also responsible for communicating with the governing body, which is what I'm doing today. Areas of primary audit emphasis. So I have to say that those areas are very common for a lot of our clients. They seem to be present in most of our city audits. The first one is just by nature, management overriding controls. We're not suggesting that management has overridden controls, or at least it didn't come to our attention. But the way we look at it is that management is the one responsible for designing and instituting controls and monitoring them. And if they decide at any time to override them, they probably can do that. So we have to design our audit procedures to mitigate that risk. We do a variety of tasks and procedures, from making sure that we assign more experienced staff to more complex area of the audit, incorporating an element of unpredictability in the audit process, testing journal entries prepared by management, making sure that they are properly supported, that there is a business rationale behind them, reviewing accounting estimates to make sure that they're free of bias, and then finally making inquiries and evaluating appropriateness of fraud responses. Revenues are an area of a higher risk, usually by default. So professional standards require us to justify why we would consider revenue not to be a high risk area. So we normally don't try to justify, we just consider it to be a higher risk area. And we rely heavily on confirmations from third parties. So we send direct communications to the county, the state, some of the major taxpayers or the major revenue payers. And we ask them to confirm how much they paid the city during the year. We reconcile that to the city's accounting records and make sure that they are reconciled. Pension and OPEB are areas of just complex accounting treatment. There's a lot that goes into them: actuarial studies, assumptions, estimates, and then taking all of this information and translate it into the accounting language, journal entries, and recording them into the accounting system. So it just requires a lot of testing, a lot of communication with the pension plans, and also reviewing the journal entries prepared by management. And then finally, this year, obviously for all of our clients, COVID-19 shelter-in-place order was something that we had to consider. As you're probably aware, the last quarter of fiscal year 2020, most of our clients have gone into remote mode, where a lot of the finance department were working remotely. And that really meant that some of the reviews and approvals that used to happen in person may now be happening in a different way. So we just had to reassess the different processes and see how did they change, and does that change impact the effectiveness of controls or not. We also had to consider that there were also a reduced volume of transactions as a result of being close to the public and many other factors. But it's something that we considered as we did our risk assessment and planned our audit. In terms of the auditor's report, so we have issued an unmodified opinion, and in simple terms, that's a clean opinion. The opinion states what standards we followed. So we have followed the generally accepted auditing standards and government auditing standards. An unmodified opinion means that the financial statements are fairly stated in all material respects, that all significant accounting policies have been consistently applied, all estimates are reasonable, and that all disclosures are properly reflected in the financial statements. So that's in a nutshell. Basically, we're saying we're agreeing with the city's information and disclosure in the financial statements. So just wanted to summarize for you some of the numbers in the financial statements. This is a 30,000-foot view, looking at the city in total, not any specific funds. So on slide number 10 here is the composition of the city's assets. And you will see that the two largest assets the city have are the cash and investments and the capital assets, which is expected. Most of our cities, they maintain liquidity for operations and responding to emergencies, and also they're building infrastructure and streets and roads and so on. You can see that there is a good increase year over year in capital assets, and that's mainly relating to that bridge project and that construction that is happening. I would say the other account that had a major increase was the deferred outflow of resources. And that is mainly because of the pension contributions to CalPERS. Because CalPERS is always 1 year behind, so even though the city made the contributions in fiscal year 20, CalPERS, the numbers reported on your financial statements are based on June 30, 19 measurements. So as far as CalPERS is concerned, they haven't received your money yet for financial statement purposes. So that's why they stay in deferred outflow until next year, and then next year you will see your pension liability being reduced by that amount. But if I go to the next slide here, you will see that the net pension liability actually did not change very much. And that's just because they are 1 year old, these numbers. So they do not reflect your most recent contributions from the POB. I think other than that, again, an increase in the long-term liabilities, that's the POB mainly, the pension obligation, that is causing that increase. I would say other than that, everything else seems to be just standard fluctuations, so nothing significant.
Just not to interrupt, but that
Yes,
back
sir.
to that, just on the increase in the long-term liabilities, that's a CalPERS, that's all driven by CalPERS.
The long-term liability, the city has issued a bond.
Yes.
So that would be mainly that increase.
Oh yeah, okay. That's actually helpful to understand, because we have done that, and that's how we're covering our obligations. But that shows up in terms of our long-term liabilities. Okay, thank you. That helps.
Mayor Haroff?
Yes, please.
Can I just ask to go back to slide 10 for me? I missed. Okay, I'm looking at that. All right, thank you.
No problem. All right, so we're on slide number 12, and slide number 12 is regarding the city's equity. So this is just simply taking your assets minus liabilities. And the purpose of this slide is to demonstrate to the council the composition of the city's equity. So we have three categories: the net investment in capital assets. This is usually an amount that is not in a spendable form and most likely will never be in a spendable form. This is how much the city invested in streets and roads and so on, minus any debt that was issued to construct or acquire those facilities. And then you have the restricted amounts, and those amounts are probably in a spendable form. However, they have legal restriction on the purpose where they can be spent. And then finally, the unrestricted amounts. Those are the amounts that have no legal restriction and under the council control, and that's a deficit 16.6 million. I would say that the main reason for the deficit is usually the pension and OPEB unfunded liabilities.
And just, I'm sorry to interrupt again. It's
No problem.
Kevin. So on that last slide, yeah, on the unrestricted, does that look comparable to what we might expect to see with other municipalities around the state of California?
That's a good question. I would say 50-50. We definitely have clients that are in the deficit as a result of pension and OPEB. They have much bigger deficits. But we also have some cities that do have pension and OPEB and still are in the positive in that number. So it's not unusual, but not everybody has a deficit. There are some cities that are still in the positive.
Okay, that's helpful and maybe an issue for us to think about in terms of long term. Thank you.
You're welcome. Right. Slide number 13 is just really looking from a full accrual basis, comparing the city's revenues minus expenses. I'm always hesitant to put that slide in. It is part of your financial statements, but this is a full accrual basis that combine all funds together, takes into account depreciation expense and some other things that you normally would not see if you're looking at your general fund or looking at one of your other operating funds. But this is also the city been receiving grants for the construction. So those grant revenues are reflected in here. And that's why you see these numbers in the last couple of years being significant more revenues than expenses. Similarly, the next slide, slide number 14, compared the net cost of service to tax revenues. So the net cost of service is normally the cost of running all city departments minus any revenues that those departments are able to bring in. And I would say that because of the last few years, you had the construction of the bridge, and there is a capital grant that is financing that. So it is reducing the net cost of service significantly. And that's why you're seeing that big discrepancy between the tax revenues and the net cost of service. Because the expense is capitalized, but the revenue is still in there. So that's why it shows like this. So once the project is complete, you no longer have those grants, probably that net cost of service will go up quite a bit. So just something to keep in mind as well. On the next slide, focusing mainly on the general fund. And the general fund, of course, is usually the most liquid fund, the fund that reflects the financial health of the city, because this is where most of the unrestricted resources are residing. So this slide is intended to show the city council what is your unrestricted fund balance, the fund balance portion that have no legal outside restrictions, and how does it compare to annual expenditures? The idea is to see if all your revenue sources stop coming in. How long can the city continue to pay bills just using available fund balance? And we have determined that you probably can continue to pay bills for about 10 months. A couple of things I want to caution here. We did adjust the annual expenditures for the general fund in 2020 because it did include 17 million to the CalPERS contribution. So we took it out just for comparison purpose. So the numbers prior year to current year are comparable. I also want to highlight that even though we're saying that there is an unrestricted fund balance of 14.8 million, City Council may have already designated those fund balance for other purposes. So we're not saying there are 14 million that are not earmarked for anything. They just don't have legal restrictions on them. So, yes, sir.
I'm sorry.
Right. Quick question. Can you clarify the unrestricted fund balance and reserves? You may be getting to that, but I was trying to get my head around that and whether that's a current asset.
So unrestricted fund balance is really just the assets minus liabilities of the fund. And so the fund balance can be that, if you have leftover grant money or if you have leftover bond money, it would be sitting into restricted fund balance, which means that whatever leftover, you cannot spend it however way you wish, that there are restrictions on how it can be spent. The unrestricted portion is the portion that is left in general fund that have no legal restriction. So that can be unspent property taxes, unspent sales tax, sales tax you're going to be receivable that you would be collecting within a month or two after the end of the year, and they're not restricted for a specific purpose. However, cities may have their own reserve policies that say we want to keep 20% of annual expenditures in fund balance. This would normally be part of the unrestricted fund balance, but may not be the full unrestricted fund balance.
I think maybe the city manager can clarify, but we have a 25% limit or something in that neighborhood, and I'm trying to reconcile that with the 10 months of payment or the 84.4%. If that's a different number, or maybe you're getting to what our reserves are.
I'm actually trying to look up the financial statements here. No, I don't have a slide on the reserves. All I was trying to say is that we look at it just from a legal perspective, whether there is an outsider posing restriction on fund balance. So we would report anything that is not restricted by an outside party. However, those amounts can already be designated by the city as a minimum fund balance reserve or for other purposes. And that is not what I'm reporting here. So you may very well have already designated those 14 million for other purposes. They don't have a legal restriction on them, that's all.
Thank you.
Sure.
Just this is Catherine, hi. Maybe Kathy can answer this. Just to follow up on Gabe's question, our fund reserve balance is 25% or 35%? I'm
25%.
25, okay. Does that answer your question, Gabe?
Well, that part, yes, but I guess it seems like the audit is separate. You know, this isn't really a discussion of where those 25% are. That was what I was seeking to find out.
Yeah, no, it's separate.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the audit is concerned, or as far as the financial statements are concerned, those amount of 14 million are reported as unassigned. And what unassigned means that they're just not designated for any specific purpose. We don't really consider 25% minimum fund balance reserve to be a purpose by itself because it's just part of the operations. So the financial statements does disclose that there is a minimum fund balance policy that the city have. So if you read in the note disclosures to the financial statements, I believe it's page 59. It talks about the minimum fund balance reserve. But all of those together are still part of that unassigned fund balance.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I know it's just a lot of different terminologies, and financial statements have to follow terminologies that are accounting terminology more than budgetary ones. So,
we are all following along. Thank you.
Okay, I appreciate it. All right, going back to my presentation. I find it. There we go. All right, so the next few slides are just focusing on the city's pension and OPEB liability. So slide number 16, just a summary of the pension contribution over the last 3 years. So obviously you can see in 2020, this is where the POB contributions were made. Slide number 17 is showing you the funded status of the pension plan. So you can see 3 numbers here, but the city reported that middle number, that 17.1 million. That is a number provided by CalPERS using the discount rate of 7.15%. The reason why we had those 2 other numbers is because the discount rate is one of the most significant assumptions that CalPERS make. And accounting standards require us to disclose in the financial statements what your liability would look like if the plan increase or decrease that discount rate by 1%. So just wanted to show you how significant the change would be if that discount rate is higher or lower by 1%.
That's very helpful because there's a lot of flux in the way CalPERS is dealing with the discount rate issue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then similarly, the city have also a OPEB plan, a retiree medical plan. And this is a summary of the contributions to the plan over the last 3 years. And also the funded status of the plan. There are 2 significant assumptions here. One is a discount rate. So this slide is showing you the middle column is the city discount rate, what is being used for the city's number. So and then it shows you 1% higher, 1% lower. Obviously, you can see the discount rate here is much smaller or much lower than the CalPERS one, and it really has to do with where the money comes from for funding the benefits. CalPERS, it's a trust, it's investing in more aggressive investments, so they're using a higher discount rate than on the OPEB side. Another important assumption in calculating the OPEB liability is the healthcare trend rates, or how expensive the premiums would be in the future. So similar scenario, the number the city used is the middle column. So just wanted to show you if the healthcare trend rate goes up or down by 1%, how your liability would look like.
Can we just go back to slide 19 again real quick?
Of course.
So So we're kind of using the 3.13. Is that market-based? Where does that come from?
So normally, so there are some guidance. If the city have a trust fund, which I'm actually trying to, sorry, to refresh my memory about that, which the city does.
Yeah, it does.
So it depends on the investment policy in that fund, and also depending on whether you're fully funding the benefits or not. So the actuary will look to see, okay, if you're not fully funding the benefits, if you're only funding 60% or 70%, then the expectation is that the remaining 30-40% will be paid out of money that is not, that's coming from the city's pool at a much lower rate. Also, depending on the investment policy. If the city has chosen a more conservative investment policy, then anticipated this rate of return and discount rate would be lower. But I would say 3.1%. That's a very, very conservative rate compared to what
that was the intent.
Yeah.
And again, back to kind of the comparable question I asked before. How does that compare with other cities of our size with similar obligations?
I mean, I think any city that have a trust fund for OPEB,
right,
is probably ahead of a lot of other cities.
Yeah.
Obviously, the city here is just getting started, so you don't have as much money in the trust, but it's a positive step that you have a trust. A lot of cities don't.
We've gotten started, so that was the point.
Yeah. So that you're already ahead of, I would say. I mean, that it's becoming more common now. I think a lot of cities are recognizing the importance of having trust funds and starting to fund these benefits. But I would say that still the majority probably do not have.
Okay, well, that's good for us. Anyway, sorry to
No.
distract.
That's why I'm here. All right. So that was actually the end of the financial section. So the next few slides are just really communicating our responsibilities and just some of the required communication to the council. So on slide number 22, on the left side is our responsibility as your independent audit firm. We are mainly responsible to provide an opinion on the city's financial statements, whether they're fairly stated in accordance with GAAP, the generally accepted accounting principles. We're responsible for evaluating internal control over financial reporting, including the tone at the top, making sure that management is responding to audit findings, is coming up with corrective action plans, is taking those findings seriously. We're responsible for evaluating compliance with laws and regulations, for ensuring that the city's financial statements are clear and transparent. And then finally, we're responsible for communicating with the governing body. Management have a lot of responsibilities in this process. So management is ultimately responsible for the financial statements. Even though we audit the numbers, we certify them, it does not relieve management from its responsibility towards those financial statements. Management is also responsible for establishing and maintaining internal control over financial reporting, making all financial records available to us during the audit process, adjust the financial statements for any material misstatements, establish controls that will prevent and detect fraud, inform us of all known and suspected fraud, comply with laws and regulations, and take corrective action on audit findings. In terms of independence, it is our responsibility as the audit firm to maintain our independence. So we look at independence in many ways. First, independence in terms of relationships. We circulate questionnaires to all of our firm personnel, asking them to identify any direct or indirect relations with city personnel or city council or city management or anything relating to the city. We make sure that if we identified any relationship, that we will remove those individuals from the engagement. We also have to evaluate any additional service that we offer the city. So for example, we prepare the financial statements on behalf of the city. And that is a service that will impair our independence if we did not put safeguards in place. So one of the safeguards that we put in place is that we have an independent reviewer who is not involved with the audit, who comes in with a fresh set of eyes and review the financials after we prepare them. In addition to obviously evaluating that the city has designated an individual with suitable skills to review our work and oversee the service. In terms of time frame, we believe that the audit was performed in a time frame communicated to the city. And this year, due to COVID-19, there were no new accounting standards to be implemented. There were, and then the Government Accounting Standard Board issued a postponement of all implementation by 1 year. So this year, there was none to comply with. This slide just really bringing to your attention that some of the numbers in your financial statements are estimated numbers. So just wanted to give you some examples of what those estimated numbers are. Estimation is acceptable as long as there is a reasonable basis behind those estimates. Obviously, pension and OPEB are the two biggest estimates in your financial statements because they're all based on assumptions and actuarial estimation. The useful life of capital assets are also estimates, and so on. And then at the bottom of the slide here, some of the important disclosure that we think are informative to the reader. So just wanted to bring to your attention some of them. In terms of difficulties encountered during the audit, I would say we didn't really encounter any difficulties. When I say that, across the board, COVID-19 has changed how the audits were done. Luckily, we as a firm, we always believe that that's going to be the future anyways, that everything is being automated, all documents are electronic, that it is becoming, I mean, we still need a one-on-one with city staff and being on site, but it's not needed 100% of the time like in the old days. And this was kind of a proof in concept where basically the whole audit was done remotely. In the future, of course, we would like a little bit more interaction with city staff and one-on-one with city staff, assuming it's safe to do so. But nonetheless, we were able to get everything we wanted to get done. We had interviews with city staff via Zoom. We exchanged documents electronically. We shared screens and did everything we were supposed to do. There were some misstatements that were discovered as a result of the audit. Management has posted all of them except one. Oftentimes, well, most of the time we will tell management or we will ask management to record adjustments. But if management felt that the adjustment was immaterial and decided not to record it, we will accept that as long as it's not material. But we're still responsible for communicating that fact to the council. And that's what we're doing today. There were no significant risks or exposure identified. Normally we communicate with legal counsel. They confirm to us any litigations, unasserted claims, and we evaluate to make sure that disclosure is proper in the financial statements. Pleased to say that we had no disagreement with management. We had one comment on internal control, and this is really just the size of the city and the fact that there is overlapping of duties. The city was able to do some segregation of duties in some of important areas like accounts payable and payroll and so on. But there are still some areas where only one person is involved in, and the information is prepared by that one person and come directly to the auditors without anybody else looking at it. And anytime you have a situation like this, you know, you don't have a second set of eyes checking it before the auditors look at it. And audit firms are not part of the city controls, so the cities should not be depending on the auditors or considering them to be part of the review process.
The good news is we have a great financial staff.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I'm sorry, the good news is, even so, we have a great financial staff and they do it. Kathy does a great job, so.
Absolutely.
Can't you just look at it twice?
That's true, but sometimes with numbers, you know, sometimes, you know, I look at things 10 times and I don't see it, and somebody come look at it and in 1 minute, they see what I didn't see for 2 hours.
Absolutely, and it's an easy fix, so we'll take care of it this.
We just need to clone Kathy and have another one sitting there.
All right. I think other than that, on this last slide here, normally before we issue our financial statements, we obtain a representation letter from the city that is normally signed by the city manager and Kathy, the finance director. It's a letter letting us know that the city disclosed to us all known facts and that they recorded all transactions and own all assets and a variety of other representations. We're not aware that the city has engaged any other accounting firm to consult on any audit matters or obtain a second opinion on any audit matters. Other than the engagement letter and the representation letter, we had no other communication with management. There were no material uncertainties relating to events and conditions, and we have not become aware of any fraud or illegal act. The next slide here is a listing of all the new standards that are coming your way. Normally we discuss with management as they come closer and basically discuss what is needed to prepare for those standards. And you can see from the slide, it's quite a few of them. So we'll be having a lot of discussions with management about those. We also hold a training seminar every year. And one of the topics that we discuss normally are the standards, the new accounting standards and implementation issues. With that, I want to say thank you very much for having me. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Also my email address. If you think of any questions later, feel free to email me. And other than that, thank you again for the opportunity.
And thank you so much for that presentation. It was very clear and succinct, and I think we all appreciate it. I think we have a couple of raised hands, maybe. Councilmember Way.
Thank you for that. Would you return to the slide behind the last one back? And I don't need you to elaborate on one more back. But I don't need you to elaborate largely, but the 2023 number 94 public-private partnerships, you don't need to get into a lengthy discussion about that, but I'm interested since we do have the Commons Foundation, which is currently raising funds for our new library and community center, which is a public-private partnership. Will this be part of GASB statement number 94? Is this something we should look at now?
I mean, you can definitely start looking at any accounting standard now. I don't know what the nature of the agreement is, so it'd be hard for me to tell. But almost all accounting standards are allowed to early implement, and some of them require some preparation ahead of time. Like, for example, having an inventory of all these partnerships and making sure you have the agreements and evaluating them to see which ones would be covered under this standard, which ones would not be covered.
Okay,
so,
thanks. That might just we might need to, I don't know enough about this, but we might need to highlight that since we have several community groups that are creating public-private partnership ideas. Even though they're independent, they want to create a fundraising mechanism to provide a benefit to a public institution. So I'll just earmark that one.
Just another reason to clone Kathy. Any other comments from the council? Seeing none, thank you very much. I think that was a very helpful conversation, and every time we have this presentation, for at least as long as I've been around on this council, which is a few years now, we've always ended up looking pretty good with the auditors, and I think this is another year where that is true as well. So we appreciate your due diligence and in interaction with the city. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Have a good evening.
Okay. So that was the end of, these are business items, so that was the end of agenda item 8.1, no action required. So I think we just move on to 8.2 and get an update. If our city manager, there he is, he's popped up again. Our city manager can give us on city activities and finances with regards to COVID-19.
I had two items I just wanted to share with the council before we adjourn with respect to COVID-19. One is just an informational item for the council and for the public. As you know, like all the other municipalities, we're managing a
an anonymous tip line. And just want to let folks know we are reading those tips. We get a lot of folks concerned about people exercising without masks. And I just encourage folks to read the state guidelines about masks, because exercising without masks is actually an allowable exception to the mask rule. And there seems to be a lot of confusion around that. And there are links on our website and on the county website to the state resources, so you can read what the guidelines are and understand what the exceptions are. But we take every one of these complaints seriously, and we do check on them. And we do give guidance to businesses when we think they may be coming up against some of those guidelines. So keep letting us know. It helps us keep the community safe, and we appreciate that. The other thing I just wanted to let the council know is, we got some grant money from the Transportation Authority of Marin to help promote dining outdoors and parklets. And you've seen the signs that we put up around Larkspur to do some promotional work. We also purchased a digital sign board, and we never got to use it because of the lockdown. So you'll soon see us doing some promotion for businesses in terms of encouraging folks to come to our downtown, come to North Magnolia, enjoy dining outdoors, that sort of thing, using a digital board that was purchased with money we had received in a grant from TAM. So I wanted to let you know, because you're going to see that soon. And if folks ask, that was grant money. We didn't purchase that with general fund money.
No, that's terrific. And I hope Julie on the chamber is aware of that, and can participate in how that's used.
That's it for tonight.
Okay, so that ends our agenda. So with that, this is kind of a long meeting, but not unexpected given the agenda. Appreciate everyone's participation, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll move adjournment.
Second.
Second.
I don't think we need a roll call. So with the unanimous consent, we will be adjourned.
Have a good night, everybody.
Night.
Thank you.
Night,